Chapter 529. It was a single flying sword that came from the front. Naturally, it was not difficult for Xiaochen to dodge it. However, it was obvious that the assessment in the 100 Refinements Valley would not be so simple. As expected, after Xiaochen easily dodged the first flying sword, two more flying swords shot out from the left and right at the same time. The difficulty kept increasing. After just 15 minutes, the number of flying swords that Xiaochen faced each time would not be less than a dozen. Dozens of flying swords were constantly shooting towards him from all directions. He did not know when the assessment would end, so Xiaochen did not dare to be careless. As the number of flying swords increased, it was naturally harder to successfully dodge them. At the same time, as time passed, there would be a few breaths of time after each round of flying sword attacks ended. However, there was no longer a gap now. Xiaochen used the stampede of the ferocious tiger to evade the attacks. After an unknown amount of time, Xiaochen finally evaded the last flying sword. The power of loss shrouded him again, and at the same time, the pure spiritual power from before reappeared. Compared to the first level of heaven, the rewards of the second level of heaven were obviously more generous. The amount of pure spiritual energy was much more. After passing through 2 levels of heaven in a row, Xiaochen passed through the second level of heaven and continued to advance into the depths of the valley. After leaving the second level of heaven, Xiaochen appeared in the valley. In front of him was the light door that led to the third level of heaven. After receiving 2 rewards, he could clearly feel that his cultivation was very close to breaking through again. A hint of excitement flashed in his eyes as he spoke. The rewards of the 100 Refinements Valley are really worthy of their reputation. No wonder the disciples of the celestial equal sect yearn for it so much. As long as you can pass the level here, breaking through your cultivation is not difficult at all. With the existence of the mysterious pure spiritual energy, I will definitely be able to break through to the lesser perfection Tao querying realm after a few more rounds. It is even possible for me to break through consecutively within this month. The 100 Refinements Valley was indeed worthy of the title of the top secret realm of the celestial equal sect. There was a trace of excitement in his heart. He was about to break through. Now, Xiaochen's cultivation was at the greater perfection Tao querying realm. If he could break through again, he would be at the lesser perfection Tao querying realm. Moreover, in Xiaochen's heart, as long as he could pass all the levels successfully, the lesser perfection Tao querying realm would not be the end. A total of 36 levels was enough for Xiaochen's cultivation to break through to the greater perfection Tao querying realm. Of course, all of this was on the premise that Xiaochen could break through to the greater perfection Tao querying realm. This time, Xiaochen only rested for 100 breaths. Because he felt that he was about to make a breakthrough, Xiaochen also increased the speed of his breakthrough. He wanted to make a breakthrough as soon as possible. After all, time was limited. The 100 Refinements Valley would only be open for a month. After 100 breaths, no one else had passed through the second heaven, including Gu Lingyao and Chao He. Without waiting for the rest, Xiaochen stepped into the third heaven. The third heaven was a test of soul power. For Xiaochen, this was not difficult at all. Xiaochen passed the test of the third heaven easily. After receiving another infusion of spiritual power, Xiaochen's cultivation soared again. He was one step closer to breaking through to the lesser perfection Tao querying realm. After leaving the third heaven, Xiaochen did not stop this time. Xiaochen passed the test of soul power easily. Hence, he did not need to stop and rest. He immediately began the test of the fourth heaven. The fourth heaven was a test of battle awareness. Once he entered, Xiaochen appeared in a dark secret room. At the same time, the spiritual power, physical strength, and soul power in his body were completely confined. At this moment, Xiaochen was no different from an ordinary person. In addition to the confinement of spiritual power, physical strength, and other warriors' strength, a row of various weapons appeared in front of Xiaochen. There were spears, sabers, axes, boxing gloves, and of course, long swords. However, these weapons were the most ordinary weapons. Xiaochen even suspected that these weapons were transformed by the 100 Refinements Valley. After all, the 100 Refinements Valley was too mysterious. Xiaochen could not understand it. He could only follow the 100 Refinements Valley's requirements to pass the test. With the appearance of these weapons, the test requirements of the fourth heaven were also passed to Xiaochen. A test of battle awareness? The fourth heaven was a test of a warrior's battle awareness. After knowing this, Xiaochen naturally chose the long sword without any hesitation. He was a sword cultivator. Besides the sword, Xiaochen knew nothing about other weapons. Moreover, besides the sword, Xiaochen was not interested in other weapons. With the long sword in hand, the other weapons quickly disappeared. Then, a stone golem appeared out of thin air in front of Xiaochen. This stone golem did not have a terrifying aura, and there was nothing different about it. Without any explanation, the stone golem directly attacked Xiaochen as soon as it appeared. In response, Xiaochen slashed out with his sword. With a crisp sound, the stone golem took Xiaochen's sword head-on, but it was unharmed. It's useless. The long sword could not hurt the stone golem at all. Xiaochen was stunned, but he quickly realized that the fourth heaven was a test of battle awareness. In other words, the stone golem must have a weakness. Only by hitting its weakness could he defeat it. He had to find its weakness. Of course, since it was its weakness, the stone golem would definitely defend tightly. This would test the warrior's battle awareness. How to find the enemy's weakness and think of a way to defeat it at the same time. It was obviously impossible to cause any damage to the stone golem with an ordinary long sword. Only by finding its weakness could he defeat the stone golem. Thinking of this, Xiaochen no longer chose to attack blindly. Instead, he dodged around. Soon, Xiaochen found the stone golem's weakness at the back of its waist. He smiled slightly and said, "It hit it quite well." After finding its weakness, the next step was to defeat it. While dodging the stone golem's attacks, Xiaochen waited for an opportunity. Soon, Xiaochen seized the gap in the stone golem's attack and stabbed out. The long sword hit the stone golem's back and defeated it directly. After defeating the first stone golem, the test was not over. After the first stone golem fell, 2 more stone golems appeared at the same time. After a bloody battle, Xiaochen defeated 4 rounds of stone golems before he passed the fourth test. The first round had 1 stone golem, the second round had 2, the third round had 3, and the fourth round had 4. Moreover, the weaknesses of these stone golems were different. However, after a fierce battle, Xiaochen finally succeeded. At the same time, the reward for the fourth heaven fell from the sky. With the infusion of pure spiritual power, Xiaochen's cultivation level broke through with a muffled sound. He finally broke through. After successfully passing the fourth heaven, Xiaochen's cultivation level also broke through from the great success Dao-seeking realm to the minor perfection Dao-seeking realm. Chapter 530. The breakthrough in his cultivation made Xiaochen overjoyed. The 100 Refinements Valley was really amazing. This was the first time in Xiaochen's life that he had made a breakthrough so easily. He did not feel any obstruction at all. It was as easy as eating and drinking water for him to make a breakthrough in his cultivation. He really didn't know where Guqi had obtained such a cultivation secret realm like the 100 Refinements Valley. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even the 5 Elements Palace, one of the 5 great divine sites of the heavenly Qin continent, couldn't compare to the 100 Refinements Valley. Of course, Xiaochen had only been to the 5 Elements Palace. As for the other 4 great divine sites, Xiaochen hadn't been there yet. However, if he could stop the large-scale attack of the demonic cultivators this time, he would definitely have the opportunity to enter the other 4 great divine sites in the future. After another quarter of an hour, the pure and mysterious spiritual power disappeared along with the power of law. Xiaochen reappeared in the valley, but he had taken another step forward. He had successfully passed the fourth heaven. Among all the people who had entered the 100 Refinements Valley, Xiaochen was now the fastest. As for those who were chasing after Xiaochen, it was naturally Gu Lingyao and Chao He. However, Chao He was 1 step slower than Gu Lingyao. At this moment, Gu Lingyao had already begun to pass the fourth heaven, while He had only passed the third heaven and had yet to enter the fourth heaven. His cultivation had successfully broken through, and with the help of the mysterious spiritual power, Xiao Chen's aura wasn't the slightest bit shaky because he had just broken through. Therefore, he didn't need to rest at all. Xiao Chen directly entered the fifth heaven. The difficulty of the fourth heaven was increasing. However, compared to the first heaven, the difficulty of the fourth heaven was at least twice as high. He didn't know what the test of the fifth heaven was. Regarding this, Xiao Chen faintly had a trace of expectation in his heart. Soon, Xiao Chen entered the fifth layer of heaven. The layout of the fifth layer of heaven was very simple. It was just an arena, and Xiao Chen appeared directly on the arena. At the same time, a dark shadow of a human figure appeared in front of Xiao Chen. Its face could not be seen clearly, as it was like a shadow. With the appearance of this black figure, the test requirements of the fifth heaven quickly appeared in Xiao Chen's mind. The requirement of the fifth heaven was to defeat the black figure in front of him. However, there were many restrictions. First of all, in this battle, Xiao Chen's physical strength. Of course, the black figure could only use physical strength to fight with Xiao Chen. In other words, the fifth layer of heaven was a test of the limits of the physical body. Under the premise that only the power of the physical body could be used, Xiao Chen had to defeat the human-shaped shadow in front of him in order to pass the test. Now that he knew the requirements of the test, the black figure let out a low roar and took the initiative to attack. Like an angry bull, he didn't make any fancy moves. He simply charged straight at Xiao Chen. At the same time, facing the attack of the black figure, Xiao Chen didn't dodge. Instead, he punched out with both fists and met the black figure head-on. After a head-on collision, Xiao Chen only felt that the black figure's strength was no weaker than his. In a physical confrontation, he couldn't gain the slightest advantage. This guy, could it be? He guessed that the black figure's strength was probably based on his physical strength. They were on par with each other. Could it be that the fifth heaven would adjust the strength of the challengers according to their physical strength? No matter who entered the fifth layer of heaven, the strength of the human-shaped shadow would be different. The stronger one's physical strength, the stronger the human-shaped shadow would be. After guessing this, it seemed that the 100 Refinements Valley was really getting more and more difficult. After a bitter battle, Xiao Chen successfully defeated the black figure and passed the fifth heaven. The battle was very intense, and Xiao Chen had consumed a lot of energy. Therefore, after passing through the first 5 layers of heaven, Xiao Chen rested for a whole hour before entering the 6th layer of heaven. The further he went, the more difficult the 100 Refinements Valley became. From the 5th heaven onwards, Xiao Chen had to face one bitter battle after another. The 5th heaven was a test of physical strength, the 6th heaven was a test of speed, the 7th heaven was a test of soul power, and the 8th heaven was a test of combat awareness. His opponents were all the black figures whose appearances couldn't be seen clearly. During the test, except for the test, Xiao Chen's other strengths were completely sealed. For example, in the 5th heaven, Xiao Chen could only use his physical strength. In the 6th heaven, Xiao Chen could only use his speed. In the 7th heaven, he could only use his soul power. In the 8th heaven, there was nothing. He could only rely on his combat awareness to fight the black figure. 4 layers of heaven in a row represented 4 extremely difficult battles. To put it bluntly, the human-shaped shadows of these 4 layers of heaven were designed according to Xiao Chen's own abilities, so it would not be easy to beat them. After 2 days, Xiao Chen successfully passed the 8th heaven. After the battle in the 8th heaven, Xiao Chen's aura was a little weak. He sat cross-legged in the valley. After swallowing a medicinal pill, Xiao Chen closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing. At the same time that Xiao Chen successfully passed the 8th heaven, in the main courtyard where Guqi lived, a faint smile hung on his face as he looked towards the direction of the back mountain. There was a black door towering in the sky. At the same time, there were lines on the black door. If one observed carefully, under the division of the lines, the black door was divided into 36 sections from bottom to top. At the same time, light dots flashed on the door. These light dots represented the genius disciples who had entered the 100 Refinements Valley, and the 36 sections on the black door represented the 36 heavens of the 100 Refinements Valley. At this moment, these light dots were of different heights. Through these light dots, the people in the outside world could determine the situation of everyone in the 100 Refinements Valley. The highest light dot appeared between the 8th heaven and the 9th heaven. This meant that this person had passed the 8th heaven but had yet to begin the 9th heaven. Looking at the highest light, Guqi was certain that this person was Xiaochen. At this moment, Xiaochen was far ahead in the 100 Refinements Valley. Guqi said faintly with a faint smile on his face. "It's already the 8th heaven? Not bad, not bad. However, the real assessment of the 100 Refinements Valley is coming next." Guqi was not the only one who had been paying attention to the situation in the 100 Refinements Valley. The other elders were the same. It could even be said that the gazes of everyone in the Celestial Equal sect were focused on the black door at the back of the mountain. There were people guarding the back of the mountain at almost every moment, reporting the situation in the 100 Refinements Valley to the disciples of the Celestial Equal sect. The situation in the 100 Refinements Valley was constantly updated. At the same time, the news that someone had passed the 8th heaven in 2 days quickly spread in the Tianqi sect. Chapter 531. The news that someone had passed through the 8th heaven in 2 days spread like wildfire in the Tianqi sect. It couldn't be helped. Every time the 100 Refinements Valley opened, it was undoubtedly the most important event in the Tianqi sect. At the same time, the 100 Refinements Valley's ranking had also become the most direct reflection of the sect's ranking. Every time the 100 Refinements Valley ended, the person with the best result would be recognized as the strongest person by all the disciples of the Tianqi sect. And now, Xiaochen had passed through the 8th heaven in 2 days. Such speed could be said to be unprecedented. At least, no one had been able to do it before. Because the light spots on the black door couldn't determine who the person who had passed through the 8th heaven was, many disciples of the Tianqi sect began an intense discussion about the person's identity. Of course, among the many disciples, there were only 2 people who were most likely to be the person. They were Gu Lingyao and Chao He. After all, both of them were kings of pride. Between the 2 of them, Gu Lingyao's strength was obviously stronger than Chao He's. Therefore, most of the disciples believed that the person who had passed through the 8th heaven in 2 days was definitely Gu Lingyao. Gu Lingyao and Chao He had the most supporters, but there were also exceptions. A very small number of disciples believed that the person could also be Xiaochen. Xiaochen was Gu Lingyao's fiancé. Guqi had personally sanctioned the marriage. In addition, although the crowd didn't know much about Xiaochen, the fact that he had easily defeated hundreds of disciples was enough to prove that Xiaochen was extraordinary. Therefore, Xiaochen could also be the person who had passed through the 8th heaven. Xiaochen was very mysterious. It was precisely because of this that people couldn't see through him. They also didn't know how strong Xiaochen was or if he was stronger than Gu Lingyao. However, it was undeniable that if Xiaochen was just an ordinary person, Guqi would definitely not have sanctioned the marriage. A small number of people chose to support Xiaochen. This was probably something that no one had expected. There were actually people who would support Xiaochen. The Tianqi sect was in a heated discussion about the 100 Refinements Valley. In the Tianqi sect, there were 2 people who could be sure that Xiaochen was the person who had passed through the 8th heaven. They were Gu Lingyao and Chao He. The 2 of them followed closely behind Xiaochen. However, no matter how hard they tried, they were still unable to catch up to Xiaochen's progress. This made them feel helpless and bitter. Ugly Xiaochen. Gu Lingyao's test. Although the test of each heaven was not simple and the further one went, it was undeniable that the 100 Refinements Valley could allow one to break through quickly without any side effects. This was the most important thing. There was no doubt that as long as he could persevere, it was not impossible for him to break through 2 small realms in a month and reach the perfected Dao Querying realm. Breaking through 2 small realms in a month at the Dao Querying realm. This speed could be said to be shocking. If it was in the outside world, even with Xiaochen's talent and various cultivation resources, Xiaochen would definitely not be able to do it. However, he could do it in the 100 Refinements Valley. This was the horror of a high-class cultivation mystic realm. It was far from being comparable to the premise of elixirs. At the same time, this was also the most fundamental reason why those sage sects were so powerful. This was because elixirs could be obtained as long as one had spiritual stones. However, it was impossible for cultivation mystic realms to be leaked. One could only enter the mystic realms to cultivate after becoming a disciple of a sage sect and reaching a certain level. Therefore, sage sects often placed great importance on cultivation mystic realms. This was the foundation of any powerful sect. No one in the 100 Refinements Valley was disappointed by Xiaochen. After teasing him for 2 hours, Xiaochen slowly opened his eyes. Then, he continued to break through without stopping and enter the 9th heaven. The difficulty of the previous 8 heavens was constantly increasing. Naturally, it was the same for the 9th heaven. Moreover, as Gucci had said, the 9th heaven was the beginning of the real assessment of the 100 Refinements Valley. After Xiaochen entered the 9th heaven, a person who looked exactly like him appeared in front of Xiaochen. It could be said that this was another version of himself. Cultivation, aura, appearance, all aspects were exactly the same as Xiaochen. It was as if he was looking into a mirror. As the other version of himself appeared, the requirements of the 9th stage also appeared in Xiaochen's mind. The requirements of the 9th stage were very simple. Other than not being able to rely on external forces, as long as one could defeat the other version of himself in front of him, it would be considered a success. It was a very simple and violent requirement. However, the difficulty was actually very high. In other words, Xiaochen had to surpass his own limits. Otherwise, how could he possibly defeat himself? Without giving Xiaochen much time to react, the other version of himself took the initiative to attack Xiaochen. The sword in his hand was the Black Dragon Sword. Facing the attack of the other version of himself, Xiaochen did not dare to be careless. He directly took out the Black Dragon Sword and the two of them immediately engaged in a fierce battle. The two people who looked exactly the same held the same sword and fought fiercely. After a fierce battle, Xiaochen also confirmed that the other version of himself in front of him was indeed not to be underestimated. In all aspects, it was almost exactly the same as him. There was not the slightest difference. Thus, it was not an easy task to defeat it. The fierce battle continued. In the end, Xiaochen did not remember how long it took, but he finally passed the 9th heaven. It was indeed a very difficult battle, but he finally succeeded. With the help of elixirs, Xiaochen used more than 2 hours to recover his condition to the peak. Then, he strode into the 10th heaven. Like the 9th heaven, the opponent in the 10th heaven was also himself. However, compared to the 9th heaven, the other version of himself in the 10th heaven was stronger. Helplessly laughing bitterly, Xiaochen said unhappily, "Do I have to fight with myself in the following tests?" He felt a little helpless, but unfortunately, Xiaochen was right. That's right. Starting from the 9th heaven, the following tests were all about fighting with oneself and constantly breaking through one's own limits. Facing an increasingly stronger version of oneself, one could only continue to move forward by defeating it. Of course, while constantly defeating oneself, Xiaochen's body would also become weaker because every time one had to break through one's own limits to be able to defeat oneself. In the following time, Xiaochen advanced triumphantly. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 days had passed. Xiaochen also successfully arrived at the 30th heaven of the 100 Refinements Valley. Chapter 532. When Xiaochen successfully passed the 30th heaven and appeared in the valley, if there were others present, they would definitely be shocked because Xiaochen's current state was simply too miserable. His entire body was covered with wounds, and blood was constantly gushing out. His clothes had long been dyed red by blood, and his aura was extremely weak. Xiaochen also smiled helplessly about his current state. There was no other way. This was the rule of the 100 Refinements Valley. In the past 20 days, Xiaochen was almost driven crazy by the 100 Refinements Valley. He didn't know who created the 100 Refinements Valley. It was simply psychopathic. From the moment Xiaochen entered the 100 Refinements Valley, he knew that the assessment of the 100 Refinements Valley would definitely be more difficult than the previous one. However, as he progressed, Xiaochen realized that it could no longer be described as difficult. It could simply be described as psychopathic. From the 9th heaven onwards, Xiaochen's opponent became himself. It was indeed the case after that. The requirement of every heaven was the same, and that was to defeat the self in front of him. However, as he progressed, the strength of the other self that Xiaochen faced became stronger and stronger. If he wanted to pass the level, Xiaochen had to constantly break through himself in order to win. This was still acceptable. However, the assessment of the 100 Refinements Valley was obviously not just about that. After the 15th level of heaven, Xiaochen would have to face another version of himself. Not only would their strength continue to increase, but their numbers would also continue to increase. Could he withstand this? Starting from the 15th level of heaven, Xiaochen had to face 2 clones of himself. Subsequently, the number of clones increased with each subsequent level of heaven. It was not until the 25th attempt that the number of people stopped increasing. However, this also meant that Xiaochen had to face the combined attacks of 10 of himself every time. Furthermore, he had to defeat all 10 of himself in order to pass the level. There was no need to explain the difficulty of this. It could be said that from the 15th heaven onwards, Xiaochen had gone all out in every battle. If it wasn't for Xiaochen's firm mental state, he would have given up long ago. Because at a glance, it was simply impossible to win this battle. Every aspect was identical to Shifeng's. Not only in terms of cultivation realm, but also in terms of strength, speed, combat awareness, and soul power. In fact, Shifeng's clone was even slightly stronger than Shifeng's. Against such opponents, it would be difficult to defeat them one-on-one, let alone 1-on-10. In the face of such a test that could be said to be impossible to win, Xiaochen gritted his teeth and persevered. However, after the 25th heaven, although the number of people did not increase, and Xiaochen faced 10 people in each heaven, there was a time limit. Previously, every time he passed a heaven, he deliberately rested as he pleased. There was no fixed time, and it was completely under his control. In this way, he could adjust his condition to its peak before continuing. But from the 25th heaven onwards, it was completely different. Every time you passed a heaven, there would be a fixed amount of time to rest, and it would become less and less. At the beginning, there was only 1 day. Later on, there was a constant change. Just like now, after successfully passing the 30th heaven, Xiaochen quickly received a message in his mind. That was, he had to challenge the 31st heaven within 6 hours. Otherwise, he would be considered to have failed. He would be directly sent out of the valley and returned to the original entrance. There were only 6 hours to rest. After knowing this, Xiaochen suddenly had the urge to curse. Looking at his current condition, even if he was given a day, it would be difficult for him to recover, let alone 6 hours. Which bastard created this 100 Refinements Valley? Although he cursed in his heart, Xiaochen did not waste any time. He immediately sat down cross-legged, swallowed a healing elixir, and began to adjust his breathing. Time was of the essence. Moreover, after 20 days of hard work, Xiaochen's cultivation had already reached the pinnacle of the lesser completion Dao querying realm. He was not far from breaking through again. At such a critical juncture, how could Xiaochen give up? If he could not break through to the advanced Dao querying realm in one go in the 100 Refinements Valley, he would undoubtedly have to waste more time to break through. Xiaochen was unwilling to let go of such an opportunity. Although he knew that it would be more and more difficult to break through later, Xiaochen did not have the slightest intention of backing down. Since there were only 6 hours, he could only make the best use of his time. He would recover to whatever extent he could. Xiaochen intended to continue breaking through. Xiaochen even wanted to see what the reward would be if he passed the 36th heaven. While Xiaochen was making the best use of his time to heal, the Tianqi sect outside was in an uproar. The originally deserted peak of the back mountain was now filled with people. Elders, deacons, and disciples. Everyone was dumbfounded as they stared at the highest light spot above the black door. This light spot naturally represented Xiao Chen. At this moment, he was between the 30th and 31st heaven. In other words, Xiao Chen had successfully passed the 30th heaven. Oh my God, who is this person? He actually passed the 30th heaven. Many disciples looked at the light spot that represented Xiao Chen and were shocked. They could not help but exclaim, "The 30th heaven." This was a height that no one had ever reached since the opening of the 100 Refinements Valley. It could be said that this was a brand new record. Moreover, it was a record that left everyone dumbfounded. Because of this, almost all the disciples of the Tianqi sect had gathered at the peak of the back mountain. Everyone was guessing who this person was. Was it Gu Lingyao, Chao He, or the mysterious Xiao Chen? There were all sorts of guesses. Moreover, it was not just these disciples. Even the elders and deacons were discussing softly. It has only been 20 days. There are still 10 days left. Do you think this person can pass the 100 Refinements Valley? You mean past the 36th heaven? That's impossible. Although I don't know the origin of the 100 Refinements Valley, countless generations of disciples have proven that it's not so easy to pass the 100 Refinements Valley. It's already heaven-defying enough to pass the 30th heaven. Some people guessed that Xiao Chen could pass the 36th heaven in one go and pass the 100 Refinements Valley directly. However, most people thought that it was impossible. After all, the difficulty of the 100 Refinements Valley was indeed too great. Moreover, it had nothing to do with cultivation. The difficulty of any cultivator who entered was actually the same. After all, the 100 Refinements Valley adjusted the difficulty according to the challenger's own situation. Most people thought that it was impossible for Xiao Chen to pass the level. However, there was still a small group of people who hoped that someone could pass the 100 Refinements Valley. After all, this was a historical scene. If Xiao Chen really did it, then everyone present would be witnesses to history. Chapter 533. Everyone was guessing Xiao Chen's identity while secretly looking forward to how far Xiao Chen could go. If Xiao Chen could really pass through the 100 Refinements Valley in one go, the entire celestial equal sect would probably be in an uproar. He did not know what kind of commotion his actions had caused. 6 hours passed in the blink of an eye. With the help of the healing elixir, Xiao Chen's physical condition improved a lot. However, he was still far from his peak. Dragging his body, Xiao Chen did not choose to give up and resolutely stepped into the 31st heaven. At the same time that Xiao Chen entered the 31st heaven, Gu Lingyao and Chao He, who were the closest to Xiao Chen, were also trying their best to climb higher. Gu Lingyao had already reached the 27th heaven, while Chao He was currently at the 22nd heaven. As for the others, they were still below the 20th heaven. Under normal circumstances, it was basically impossible to break through the 20th level of the 100 Refinements Valley if one was not a king of geniuses. Therefore, other than Xiao Chen, Gu Lingyao, and Chao He, the other prodigy disciples were still struggling bitterly below the 20th level of the 100 Refinements Valley. Even Mu Feng had only reached the 17th level of the 100 Refinements Valley. It had to be said that Gu Lingyao and Chao He's performance was already good enough, especially Gu Lingyao. He had reached the 27th heaven in 20 days. If it was in the previous 100 Refinements Valley, such a result would definitely be the focus of everyone's attention. Unfortunately, because of Xiao Chen's existence this time, Gu Lingyao and Chao He were clearly forgotten by everyone. There was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Under Xiao Chen's brilliance, Gu Lingyao and Chao He were clearly overshadowed. No one cared about them because everyone's eyes were locked on Xiao Chen. As Xiao Chen entered the 31st heaven, someone in the celestial equal sect was the first to call out. "Look, it's starting. He's starting to challenge the 31st heaven." Following this person's voice, everyone's gaze shifted towards the black door. They saw that the light spot representing Xiao Chen had already entered the 31st heaven from the 30th heaven. This also meant that Xiao Chen had begun to challenge the 31st heaven. The challenge began again. Everyone stared intently at the black door. Although they couldn't see the process of the battle, it didn't stop them from looking forward to the result. While the Tianqi sect was in an uproar because of Xiao Chen's performance, Gu Qi sat in the bamboo courtyard where Gu Qi lived. He was sipping tea as he cast his gaze towards the back of the mountain. A hint of surprise flickered in his eyes. Could it be that this kid can really pass through the 100 Refinements Valley? If that's the case, then master. Gu Qi was also shocked by Xiao Chen's performance. No one knew the 100 Refinements Valley better than Gu Qi. Moreover, it could be said that Gu Qi was the only one who knew the origin of the 100 Refinements Valley because he was the one who brought it back to the Tianqi sect. There was once an elder of the Tianqi sect who guessed that the 100 Refinements Valley was created by Gu Qi. However, Gu Qi smiled helplessly. These guys were underestimating the 100 Refinements Valley too much. Not to mention that Gu Qi was only a half-step saint expert on the surface. Even a saint expert couldn't create a cultivation mystic realm like the 100 Refinements Valley. The 100 Refinements Valley was created by Gu Qi's master. As for Gu Qi's master, he was an antique figure in the Tiana continent. Of course, he was already dead now. However, while others didn't know how terrifying his master was, Gu Qi knew that his master was an almighty quasi-step saint expert, an existence that surpassed the saint stage. It could be said that Gu Qi's master was the last quasi-step saint in the Tiana continent because after his master broke through to the quasi-step saint realm, the origin power of the Tiana continent was also exhausted. Since then, no one in the entire Tiana continent could break through to the quasi-step saint realm. Such a powerful antique figure had left behind the 100 Refinements Valley before his death. According to the Venerable of the World, his inheritance was hidden in the 100 Refinements Valley, and even Gu Qi didn't know what this inheritance was. According to his master's instructions, only those who passed through the 36th heaven of the 100 Refinements Valley had a chance to obtain the inheritance. Unfortunately, after so many years, no one could reach the 30th heaven, let alone pass through the 100 Refinements Valley. Xiao Chen was the first person to reach the 30th heaven of the 100 Refinements Valley. Gu Qi looked in the direction of the back mountain with a complicated expression in his eyes. After a long while, he murmured softly, "Little guy, can you really pass through the 100 Refinements Valley? If you can obtain Master's inheritance, it will definitely be an unimaginable fortune for you." He had a trace of expectation for Xiao Chen. Of course, Xiao Chen naturally didn't know all of this. At this time, Xiao Chen was still fighting a tough battle in the 31st heaven. Time passed slowly, and the 1-month deadline for the 100 Refinements Valley was getting closer and closer. There were only 3 days left before the 100 Refinements Valley closed, but more and more people gathered on the back mountain. So many people gathered on the back mountain for no other reason than Xiao Chen. At this time, Xiao Chen had already reached the 30th heaven. Everyone was dumbfounded when they saw the light spot land on the 35th heaven. However, this time, no one made a sound. Everyone was nervously waiting for the final result. As long as Xiao Chen passed through the 35th heaven, there would be hope for him to pass. Many disciples, deacons, and elders of the Tianqi sect stared at the light spot at the top of the black door. At this moment, even if Gu Lingyao, who was ranked second, passed the 30th heaven, no one cared. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Xiao Chen's light spot. In the 35th heaven, Xiao Chen's injuries were so severe that it was indescribable. Xiao Chen clenched his teeth tightly. He didn't have the slightest intention of retreating, because he was just a step away from breaking through to the perfected Dao querying realm. As long as he could pass through the 35th heaven and receive another infusion of spirit power, Xiao Chen would have absolute confidence in breaking through to the perfected Dao querying realm. This was an extremely crucial time. Therefore, no matter what, Xiao Chen had to successfully cross the 35th heaven. As for the final 36th heaven, Xiao Chen didn't care anymore. He was just a step away. He had to break through. As the saying went, a difference of a millimeter could lead to a loss of 1,000 miles. If he didn't grasp this opportunity, he would have to pay 1,000 times or even 10,000 times the time to break through to the perfected Dao querying realm. With the determination to never retreat, Xiao Chen finally passed through the 35th heaven after a series of tough battles. After successfully passing through the 35th heaven, the power of the laws descended once again. At the same time, the mysterious spirit power continuously poured into Xiao Chen's body. With the infusion of the spirit power, Xiao Chen's cultivation didn't have any hindrances. He smoothly broke through the perfected Dao querying realm and entered the perfected Dao querying realm. Chapter 534. He had finally broken through. In less than a month, Xiao Chen had completed 2 breakthroughs in his cultivation. Such progress was absolutely shocking. At the same time, it also reflected the heaven-defying nature of the 100 Refinements Valley. A cultivation mystic realm that could allow a Dao querying realm cultivator to break through 2 small realms in a month was probably the top cultivation mystic realm in the Sage sect. Of course, Xiao Chen did not know that the 100 Refinements Valley was a cultivation mystic realm created by a quasi-sage. Otherwise, a mystic realm created by a sage would naturally not be able to achieve such an effect. Moreover, the Tiana continent no longer had the power of origin. A quasi-sage had not appeared for thousands of years. There were probably no quasi-sages left in the Tiana continent now. After all, Guqi's master was already dead. His body's condition was terrible, but at this moment, Xiao Chen was extremely happy. He had succeeded. He had finally succeeded in breaking through. At the same time, Xiao Chen felt that this trip to the 100 Refinements Valley had been considered a success. As for the last 36th heaven, Xiao Chen did not intend to challenge it again. It was not wrong to never retreat. However, if one knew that it was impossible and still tried, it would be stupid. Just like now, Xiao Chen's physical condition was obviously not enough to continue challenging the 36th heaven. Although Xiao Chen also wanted to see what would happen after clearing the 100 Refinements Valley and what rewards he would get, Xiao Chen still chose to give up because he really could not take it anymore. He forced his way through the 35th heaven and made another breakthrough in his cultivation. This was already Xiao Chen's limit. With the end of the infusion of spiritual power and the disappearance of the power of laws, Xiao Chen's figure came to the valley. In front of him was also a light door. This was the entrance to the 36th heaven. At the same time, it was also the end of the 100 Refinements Valley. As Xiao Chen left the 35th heaven, in the outside world, at the top of the back mountain, waves of gasps could be heard continuously. He had passed. He had really passed. Someone had passed the 35th heaven. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, who would dare to believe that someone could pass the 35th heaven in the 100 Refinements Valley this time? Only the last heaven is left. As long as he passes it, he can pass the 100 Refinements Valley. Although I do not know who that person is, regardless of who he is, I hope that he will be able to pass through the 100 Refinements Valley. Everyone hoped that Xiao Chen could continue to challenge the levels. It would be best if he could clear the 100 Refinements Valley in one go. Just as everyone was thinking this, the light spot that represented Xiao Chen on the black door only paused for about 10 seconds after passing the 35th level before entering the 36th level. This change caused everyone to be stunned. What was going on? Doesn't this person need rest? I just cleared the 35th layer of heaven and entered the 36th layer of heaven without any rest. They were a little shocked, but they could not figure it out. Everyone knew, even those who had never entered the 100 Refinements Valley had heard of it. In the 100 Refinements Valley, there would be a period of rest after each level was cleared. During this period of time, the challenger could recover. However, Xiao Chen did not stop and directly entered the 36th layer of heaven. This was somewhat puzzling. Of course, the reason why Xiao Chen entered the 36th layer of heaven was actually not what everyone thought. After leaving the 35th layer of heaven, Xiao Chen originally planned to wait here until the 100 Refinements Valley ended. After all, with his current state, he really did not have the strength to challenge the 36th layer of heaven. However, as soon as this thought appeared in his mind, before Xiao Chen could sit down cross-legged, a terrifying suction force suddenly appeared from the light door of the 36th layer of heaven and pulled Xiao Chen in without any explanation. Without any strength to resist, he was forcefully pulled into the 36th layer of heaven. Xiao Chen's expression immediately changed and he cursed helplessly. F***CK, is this a trap? Can I choose not to challenge it? There was no choice at all. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Chen was pulled into the 36th layer of heaven. The scene in front of him changed. In the end, when Xiao Chen came back to his senses, he appeared in a world full of birds and fragrant flowers. It seemed to be the end of a valley. There were towering cliffs on 3 sides. However, the scenery here was quite beautiful. There was a small lake. The grass on the ground was green, and a few ancient trees that were not tall surrounded the small lake. The scenery was very good. Looking around suspiciously, Xiao Chen was puzzled. This place that looks like a paradise is the end of the 100 Refinements Valley? This scene is not right. It is completely different from the previous 35th layer of heaven. Obviously, the feeling of the 36th layer of heaven was completely different from what Xiao Chen had imagined. Just as Xiao Chen was puzzled, an old voice sounded out of nowhere. Finally, someone has come. I can't wait any longer. The voice appeared out of nowhere. Hearing this, Xiao Chen looked around vigilantly. Since entering the 100 Refinements Valley, Xiao Chen had always been alone. This was also the rule of the 100 Refinements Valley. Now that he suddenly heard this voice, it naturally made Xiao Chen vigilant. Just as Xiao Chen was searching for the source of the voice, the old voice sounded again. At the same time, a tall and sturdy old man slowly appeared in front of Xiao Chen. Kid, you don't have to look for me. I'm here. Looking at the old man in front of him, this old man was very strange. He was clearly just skin and bones, but he gave off an extremely strong feeling. Moreover, the old man's body was a little weak. With a glance, Xiao Chen could tell that this old man was just a wisp of soul. No, not a soul, but a saint soul. This was because Xiao Chen sensed the power of loss from the old man. After a warrior broke through the saint realm and became a saint, not only did he shed his mortal body, but even his soul would undergo a qualitative change and become a saint soul. A saint soul could exist for a very, very long time. As long as it was properly preserved, theoretically, a saint soul could exist forever. It would not slowly dissipate with the passage of time like a soul. A saint soul would not. However, once a saint fell and his physical body died, only his saint soul remained. This meant that he could no longer use his power at will and could not drift around. He had to use a special method to preserve his saint soul and let it fall into a deep sleep. Only in this way could he maintain his saint soul for a long time without dissipating. Otherwise, once his power was exhausted, his saint soul would also dissipate. The old man in front of him was just a wisp of a saint soul. Looking at him, Xiao Chen took the initiative to ask, "Who are you?" "Haha, kid, you are very direct. My surname is Shu, and my name is Feng. You can call me Elder Shu." In the face of Xiao Chen's inquiry, the old man did not hide anything and answered truthfully. Xiao Chen naturally did not know Shu Feng. However, if it was Gu Qi or the older saints of the Tiana continent, they would definitely know this person. This was because Shu Feng was recorded as the last quasi-saint of the Tiana continent. At the same time, he was Gu Qi's master. Chapter 535. He did not expect to meet Shu Feng at the last level. However, Xiao Chen did not know his identity. He looked at Shu Feng and said, "So, you are the last test of the 100 Refinements Valley?" The 36th level was the last level of the 100 Refinements Valley. Shu Feng revealed a treacherous smile when he heard Xiao Chen's words. You can say so. Moreover, as long as you pass the test of the 36th level, you will obtain a heaven-defying opportunity. It can be said to be the final reward of the entire 100 Refinements Valley. It was obvious that Shu Feng was trying to seduce Xiao Chen. However, Xiao Chen was indeed a little tempted when he heard his words. Along the way, Xiao Chen did not doubt the mystery of the 100 Refinements Valley. Just his current cultivation was enough to show how extraordinary the 100 Refinements Valley was. As if he could see that Xiao Chen was a little tempted, Shu Feng continued, "Little fellow, I can tell you responsibly that compared to the true reward of the 100 Refinements Valley, the infusion of spiritual energy you experienced earlier is just trash. Compared to the final reward, everything before was just trash. Xiaochen began to feel conflicted when he heard Xu Feng's words. First of all, his current physical condition was not good. It could even be said that it was very bad. However, he had already reached this step. If he gave up, how could Xiaochen be willing? He kept thinking in his heart. After a while, Xiaochen suddenly remembered that Gu Lingyao had briefly introduced the 100 Refinements Valley to him. At that time, the two of them were still in the Moonless Empire. At that time, Gu Lingyao told Xiaochen that if he entered the 100 Refinements Valley, he had to do his best to reach a higher level. Only then would he be able to obtain more opportunities and rewards. He did not have to worry about his own safety because there was no danger to his life in the 100 Refinements Valley. Once he could not hold on, the rules of the 100 Refinements Valley would automatically judge him as a failure and send him out. There was no danger to his life within the 100 Refinements Valley. When he suddenly recalled the words that Gu Lingyao had once said to him, Xiaochen's heart calmed down. He quickly made a decision. Since there was no danger to his life, he would naturally give it a try. At the very most, he would fail. The expression in his eyes changed. Seeing this, a smile flashed across Xu Feng's eyes. He looked at Xiaochen with a smile and said, "Boy, it seems like you have made your decision. Elder, just tell me directly. What are the requirements to pass the 36th heaven?" Xiaochen replied. He had already decided to give it his all. Hearing this, Xu Feng pointed at the small lake not far away. Actually, although it was called a small lake, it was more like a pond because its area was indeed too small. Its diameter was not more than 10 meters. Go in first. I will tell you the requirements to pass the 36th heavenly layer later. Xu Feng said. Without doubting Xu Feng's words, Xiaochen stepped into the pond. It was not deep. However, the moment Xiaochen entered the pond, a huge suction force appeared and immediately restricted Xiaochen's movements. The sudden change caused Xiaochen's expression to change slightly. At this moment, Xu Feng also came to the side of the lake. He still had a smile on his face as he looked at Xiaochen and said, "Boy, this is the test of the 36th heaven. This pond is called the 100 Refinements Blood Pool. It is the most crucial step in cultivating the 100 Refinements Battle Body. What you need to do is to persevere. When you are able to cultivate the first layer of the 100 Refinements Battle Body, you will pass the test of the 100 Refinements Valley. The 100 Refinements Battle Body is the final reward of the 100 Refinements Valley. The 100 Refinements Battle Body was the final reward of the 100 Refinements Valley." Hearing this, Xiaochen was slightly stunned. Xiaochen had never heard of the 100 Refinements Battle Body. However, in the Tiana continent, the 100 Refinements Battle Body was recognized as the #1 body refining technique. Xu Feng had also cultivated the 100 Refinements Battle Body, so he was very clear about the strength of the 100 Refinements Battle Body. It could even be said that if it were not for the 100 Refinements Battle Body, Xu Feng would not have become a quasi-saint. On the Tiana continent, many experts thought that the 100 Refinements Battle Body was created by Xu Feng. However, only Xu Feng knew that he could not create such a mysterious body refining technique with his own ability. Xu Feng guessed that the person who created the 100 Refinements Battle Body was at least a great sage or an existence of a higher level. Otherwise, it was impossible to create such a peerless technique like the 100 Refinements Battle Body. Unfortunately, although the 100 Refinements Battle Body was strong, the requirements to cultivate it, or the threshold, were also very high. Xu Feng once planned to pass the 100 Refinements Battle Body to Gu Qi, but Gu Qi could not meet the requirements to cultivate the 100 Refinements Battle Body at all. Therefore, after Xu Feng's death, the 100 Refinements Battle Body did not find a suitable successor. Peerless cultivation methods were often not something that could be cultivated just because one wanted to. The threshold was so high that it was enough to shut out 99% of the warriors. It was just like how all warriors wanted to obtain a peerless cultivation method, but at the same time, a peerless cultivation method also hoped to meet a warrior who was worthy of it. If one did not have the ability and forcibly cultivated a peerless technique, there would often only be one result, which was to seek one's own destruction. As Xu Feng's voice fell, before Xiaochen could say anything, the entire pool underwent a huge change. In just a few breaths, the originally clear pool suddenly turned blood-red. It had turned into a pool of blood. At the same time, with the appearance of the pool of blood, Xiaochen only felt that something was constantly drilling into his body. Gradually, an unbearable pain quickly swept through Xiaochen's body. He gritted his teeth and looked at Xu Feng, who was beside the pool, in horror. In the face of Xiaochen's gaze, Xu Feng still smiled and said, "Boy, it is not so easy to cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body successfully. This is also the test that the 100 Refinements Valley said. Now, there are only two paths in front of you. Either you cultivate the first level of the 100 Refinements battle body and obtain the final reward of the 100 Refinements Valley from me, which is the cultivation method of the 100 Refinements battle body, or you can only die in this pool of blood. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you. The previous 35 levels were indeed not life-threatening, but the 36th level is different. You will die. So, if you don't want to die, boy, you'd better do your best. You will die." Hearing Xu Feng's words, Xiaochen instantly had the urge to curse. This old man was simply a fraud. Why didn't he say it just now? Why did he have to wait until he had no way out before telling him that the 36th level was a death trap? As his voice fell, Xu Feng no longer cared about Xiaochen. He hummed a little tune and walked away. Xiaochen, who was behind, could not help but let out a scream because the pain in his body was getting more and more intense. It was as if his entire body was being torn apart piece by piece. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 536. Xiaochen wasn't a person who couldn't endure pain, but the pain this time was simply, he didn't know how to describe it. Imagine, his flesh was being torn apart piece by piece. What kind of feeling was that? Xiaochen couldn't help but scream. Hearing Xiaochen's scream, the smile on Xu Feng's face slowly faded away as she turned around. He knew the pain of practicing the 100 Tempering War God, so he could understand what Xiaochen was enduring. Back then, when he practiced the 100 Tempering War God, he almost died. As for Gu Qi, he didn't even enter the blood pool. He only put a finger in and he couldn't stand it. But now, Xiaochen's entire body was soaked in the blood pool. Let's hope that this little guy can hold on. Gu Qi sighed softly as he thought to himself. Then, he left without looking back. Xu Feng had disappeared, but for Xiaochen, the real hell had only just begun. As the blood continuously flowed into Xiaochen's body through his pores, Xiaochen's entire body turned red like burning charcoal. Xiaochen clenched his teeth so hard that they were about to shatter, but the pain didn't lessen at all. Instead, it became more and more intense. At the same time, a powerful suction force from the blood pool kept pulling Xiaochen down, as if it wanted to drag him into hell. Xiaochen struggled fiercely, but unfortunately, it was useless. Soon, Xiaochen was pulled into the blood pool. At the same time, the blood pool quickly regained its calm. Only 2 bubbles would appear from time to time. Xiaochen gradually sank into the blood pool. He really wanted to faint. At least that way, he wouldn't have to endure this inhumane torture. However, the desire to live in his heart kept telling Xiaochen that he couldn't lose consciousness. He couldn't faint. Otherwise, he might never wake up again. In order to survive, he absolutely couldn't faint. He had to hold on. Otherwise, everything would be over. Xiaochen forcibly held on to the last trace of consciousness. However, in a sober state, the constant pain from his body was really unbearable. Every second felt as long as a century. Since Xu Feng created the 100 Tempering Valley, Xiaochen was the first person to reach the 30th heaven. Therefore, no one in the world knew anything about the 36th heaven. Therefore, Xiaochen could only rely on himself to cross the river. He didn't know how long he had to hold on, but Xiaochen knew very well that he could only hold on. Once he failed, it would mean death. Xiaochen gritted his teeth and held on in the 36th heaven. At the same time, the 1-month deadline of the 100 Tempering Valley was getting closer and closer. Several days later, many disciples, deacons, elders, and even Guqi appeared at the peak of the back mountain of the Celestial Equal Sect. It was for no other reason than today was the day the 100 Refinements Valley was closed. It was time for the disciples of the Heavenly Sect who had entered the 100 Refinements Valley for a month to leave. Everyone looked at the highest light spot. At this time, the light spot had stopped at the 36th heaven for a few days. Many disciples were discussing softly. It's been so many days. Hasn't he passed the 36th heaven? Do you think it's so easy to pass through the 100 Tempering Valley? Just wait and see. The 100 Tempering Valley will be closed in another 15 minutes. At that time, everyone will be teleported out. We will also know who has reached the 36th heaven. Until now, no one knew who had reached the 36th heaven. However, the second light spot had stopped at the 30th heaven. This light spot undoubtedly represented Gu Lingyao. In a month's time, Gu Lingyao had also tried his best to pass through the 30th heaven. However, this was already Gu Lingyao's limit. In the past few days, Gu Lingyao had tried to pass through the 31st heaven several times, but unfortunately, all of them ended in failure. Time passed slowly. A quarter of an hour soon passed. At this time, the tightly shut black iron door slowly opened. Then, the disciples who entered the 100 Tempering Valley were teleported out one by one. Starting from the lower levels, the lower the ranking of the Heaven's Pride disciples, the earlier they would be teleported out. Therefore, no one paid too much attention to those who were teleported out first. Now, everyone's eyes were on the person who had reached the 36th heaven. The Heaven's Pride disciples were teleported out one after another. Soon, Chao He and Gu Lingyao appeared on the scene one after another. Chao He was teleported out before Gu Lingyao. Seeing the two of them, many disciples present were stunned. What's going on? Gu Lingyao and Chao He had been teleported out of the 100 Tempering Valley, but the light spot above the black iron door did not disappear. In other words, the person who had reached the 36th heaven was not Chao He or Gu Lingyao, but someone else. Not only the disciples, but even some deacons were in disbelief. Most people thought that the person who had reached the 36th heaven must be Gu Lingyao, but now, it was obvious that it was not him. If it's not Senior Chao He or Senior Sister Lingyao, then who could it be? Someone whispered softly. However, facing this question, no one could answer. When Gu Lingyao and Chao He were teleported out, and everyone was waiting for the last person to appear, the black iron door suddenly closed slowly. This change stunned everyone present. The black iron door closed? There's still someone in there. Why did it close directly? Every time the 100 Tempering Valley opened, everyone would be teleported out after a month. But now, there was still one person who hadn't come out, and the black iron door closed by itself. This was something that had never happened before. Everyone was stunned, but soon, someone shouted. Xiaochen didn't appear. He's the one who reached the 36th heaven. All the prodigy disciples had already left the 100 Refinements Valley. Only Xiaochen had not appeared. As a result, it was certain that the person who was still in the 100 Refinements Valley and had reached the 36th level of heaven was definitely Xiaochen. No one expected that the person that everyone had been guessing was actually Xiaochen. This was indeed shocking. But now, they didn't know if they should be happy or worried because Xiaochen was still in the 100 Tempering Valley and hadn't been teleported out. No one knew what was going on. Gu Lingyao also came to Guqi's side and said with a worried look. Father, Xiaochen, please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 537. The black iron door had already closed, but Xiaochen had yet to come out. At this moment, Gu Lingyao also knew that Xiaochen had actually reached the 36th heaven. However, now was not the time to be happy because no one knew what Xiao Chen had encountered in the 36th heaven or if there was any danger. In fact, Gu Lingyao's performance this time was indeed dazzling enough. It was a pity that he had encountered Xiao Chen. If not for Xiao Chen, Gu Lingyao's result of reaching the 30th heaven was enough to set off a storm in the Tianqi sect. Gu Lingyao did not feel the slightest bit of jealousy because Xiao Chen had overshadowed his brilliance. On the contrary, he was very worried about Xiao Chen's safety. He did not know why, but after knowing that Xiao Chen had not left the 100 Refinements Valley, Gu Lingyao's heart was in a mess. He even had the thought of rushing into the 100 Refinements Valley again. Facing his daughter's question, Gu Qi revealed a strange smile on his face. His daughter probably had some unusual feelings for Xiao Chen. Otherwise, why would she be so concerned about Xiao Chen? Sensing Gu Qi's smile, Gu Lingyao's face immediately turned red. He lowered his head and did not dare to look at Gu Qi. Seeing this, Gu Qi said slowly, Xiao Chen is now at the 36th heaven. He will definitely have his own good fortune. It's useless for us to worry. Arrange for someone to guard here. Gu Qi knew what was in the 36th heaven. However, whether or not he could obtain that peerless opportunity would depend on Xiao Chen himself. Gu Qi had no other choice. Hearing Gu Qi's words, Gu Lingyao fell into silence. Since even Gu Qi said that there was no other way, it was obvious that this was the only way. The black door had already closed, but it did not disappear. This was another strange thing. In the past, after the 100 Refinements Valley closed, the black iron door would dissipate. However, it did not this time. Could it be because of Xiao Chen? Everyone guessed. The huge black door was still standing at the top of the mountain. Gu Qi didn't explain anything about it. He only arranged for Tian Guochuan to guard the door and inform him immediately if there were any changes. After leaving Tian Guochuan behind, Gu Qi left with Gu Lingyao. As for the others, after waiting for a while, they saw that Xiao Chen still had no intention of appearing. Although they were curious, they chose to leave one after another. Unaware that the 100 Refinements Valley had closed, Xiao Chen continued to grit his teeth and endure in the blood pool. He had no idea how much time had passed. Xiao Chen felt as though he had been in the blood pool for centuries. Every second was unbearable. As Xiao Chen stubbornly persisted, Xu Feng, who had disappeared for several days, reappeared at the edge of the blood pool. Xu Feng revealed a hint of surprise as he looked at the calm blood pool. It's already been 4 days? Can this little guy really succeed? Xiao Chen's performance surprised Xu Feng. At the same time, there was also a hint of excitement. Xu Feng's greatest wish was to pass down the 100 Refinements battle body. Unfortunately, there were too few people who met the cultivation requirements of the 100 Refinements battle body. Xu Feng hadn't found anyone until his death. He was very clear about the terror of the 100 Refinements battle body. Xu Feng was able to become a quasi-saint by relying on the 100 Refinements battle body. Moreover, Xu Feng hadn't succeeded in cultivating the 100 Refinements battle body. He could only be considered to have cultivated half of it. Even so, Xu Feng still relied on it to reach the quasi-saint realm. It was hard to imagine what it would be like to cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body to the perfection realm. Therefore, Xu Feng sincerely hoped that Xiao Chen could succeed. Otherwise, a peerless technique like the 100 Refinements battle body would disappear from the world. Xu Feng stared blankly at the blood pool. After a while, he left again. 4 days wasn't enough. Xiao Chen still had to persist. Otherwise, the result would still be death. Unaware of Xu Feng's appearance, Xiao Chen didn't have the mind to care about other things at this time. All of his attention was focused on resisting the erosion of the sharp pain. After 4 whole days, the sharp pain didn't lessen at all. On the contrary, it became more and more unbearable. However, under such sharp pain, Xiao Chen also discovered that his physical body was undergoing some kind of transformation, especially his skin. It seemed to be being transformed and constantly tempered. What Xiao Chen didn't know was that under this continuous tempering, Xiao Chen's skin was indeed undergoing some kind of transformation. Once this transformation was completed, it was equivalent to Xiaochen successfully cultivating the first layer of the 100 Refinements battle body, the Golden Armor realm. Of course, this was only the entry level. Xiaochen didn't know all this. After all, Xu Feng didn't explain anything to him. He just told him to persist, otherwise he would die. Therefore, Xiaochen could only grit his teeth and persist. Damn it, when will this pain stop? Xiaochen cursed in his heart. In the beginning, facing such sharp pain, Xiaochen would still struggle for a while. However, he didn't even have the strength to struggle now. He could only endure all of this silently. Only Xiaochen was left in the entire 100 Refinements Valley. In the paradise of the 36th heaven, Xiaochen silently endured the inhuman torture. Time passed day by day. After 7 days, Xu Feng appeared at the side of the blood pool again. This time, Xu Feng actually revealed a smile on his face. Looking at the blood pool that had faded a lot, Xu Feng chuckled and said, "This kid is indeed not an ordinary person. He actually succeeded." Persisting in the blood pool for 7 days meant that Xiaochen had succeeded. Now, Xiaochen had already entered the entry level of the first layer of the 100 Refinements battle body, the Golden Armor realm. When Xu Feng first began to cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body, he also persisted for 7 days. Now, Xiaochen had done it. It could be said that Xiaochen had succeeded. Even if he was unconscious now, his life would no longer be in danger. However, Xiaochen didn't know about this. He still gritted his teeth and persisted. However, after 7 days, Xiaochen also discovered that the pain didn't seem to be so intense anymore. He didn't know if the power of the blood pool had weakened or if he had already adapted to this kind of pain. Xiaochen naturally didn't know that he had already entered the entry level of the first layer of the 100 Refinements battle body, the Golden Armor realm. On the shore, Xu Feng didn't have any intention of reminding Xiaochen. Since he had persisted for 7 days, Xu Feng also wanted to see how long this kid could persist. If he could persist until the energy in the blood pool was completely absorbed, it would definitely be of great benefit to Xiaochen's future cultivation. In this way, Xiaochen might really be able to cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body to the perfection realm. Kid, don't disappoint this old man. This old man hasn't been able to successfully cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body in my life. If you can succeed, this old man's wish will be fulfilled. Xu Feng looked at the depths of the blood pool where a figure vaguely appeared and muttered softly. Let me tell everyone something. Due to some matters at home, I need to return to my hometown for 6 days. Therefore, from today until the 21st, there will be adjustments to the update. From 4 updates a day to 3 updates a day. After the 21st, it will return to normal. Of course, I will make up for the 6 days that I owe you. Chapter 538. He looked at Xiaochen with a smile on his face. As time passed, the blood in the blood pool became thinner and thinner. At this time, Xiaochen could be clearly seen on the shore. For 3 days in a row, Xu Feng did not leave the side of the blood pool. Seeing that Xiaochen had no intention of leaving, Xu Feng could no longer remain calm. 10 days, it had been 10 days. Xiaochen had stayed in the blood pool for 10 days. He was full of joy. After waiting for so many years, the most suitable person for the tempered battle body had finally appeared. There was no doubt that the tempered battle body would be much stronger in the hands of Xiaochen than in the hands of Xu Feng. This was because Xu Feng had not been able to cultivate the tempered battle body completely, but Xiaochen might succeed. Xu Feng was very excited when he thought that Xiaochen would cultivate the tempered battle body to perfection one day. It was hard to imagine what kind of power Xiaochen would have when that time came. Another 2 days passed. Xu Feng was still waiting on the shore without disturbing Xiaochen. He had been in the blood pool for 12 days, and the energy in the blood pool was almost completely absorbed by Xiaochen. On this day, Xiaochen soared into the sky from the blood pool. His body exuded a rich golden light, as if a layer of golden armor had wrapped around Xiaochen's body. At the same time, a faint golden halo appeared behind Xiaochen, illuminating Xiaochen like a Buddha. It was hard to look at him directly. A golden sun. That's right. At this moment, Xiaochen was like a golden sun, exuding a chilling aura. After about 100 breaths, the golden light on Xiaochen's body slowly receded and then slowly fell. However, at this time, the clothes on Xiaochen's body had clearly disappeared long ago. Xiaochen did not pay attention to the excited Shufeng at the side. He minded his own business and went to put on a set of clothes, then turned to look at Shufeng. "Old man, you almost got me killed this time." Xiaochen's words were filled with resentment. However, Shufeng was a saint after all, so what could he do even if he was filled with resentment? He could only grumble. In any case, he would definitely not be able to defeat Shufeng. Even though he was only left with a wisp of saint soul, he could definitely suppress him easily. Naturally, Shufeng could feel the resentment in Xiaochen's heart. However, he didn't care and laughed loudly. "Ha, boy, you still blame this old man. If it wasn't for this old man, how could you have such a great fortune? How is it? Is there any difference between this body and the previous one?" Shufeng didn't care about Xiaochen's complaints at all. After hearing his words, Xiaochen didn't care anymore. He nodded and said truthfully, "It's a world of difference." Indeed, although he had fallen into Shufeng's trap and suffered for more than 10 days, the benefits were obviously not small. It could even be said that it was immeasurable. In just 12 days, Xiaochen's body had undergone earth-shaking changes. Compared with his previous body, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a world of difference. Xiaochen's heart was filled with excitement. Although he had suffered a lot, the harvest was also unimaginable. As Shufeng said, compared with the tempered battle body, the previous rewards were simply trash. This sentence wasn't an exaggeration at all. Seeing that Xiaochen was also somewhat unable to contain the excitement in his heart, Shufeng smiled and said, "That's why you're still full of resentment. Do you know how many people in the Tiana continent want to obtain the tempered battle body? Even those saints would go crazy for it. Old man, this tempered battle body is indeed unimaginably strong. I wonder what level of body refining cultivation technique it is." Xiaochen had no doubt about the strength of the tempered battle body because he had personally experienced it. In the face of Xiaochen's inquiry, Shufeng didn't hide anything about the tempered battle body at this time. There was a touch of pride on his face as he said, "According to this old man's guess, the level of this tempered battle body has already surpassed the saint level." Surpassed the saint level? Hearing this, Xiaochen's face changed slightly. After the heaven level was the saint level, and a saint level martial skill was absolutely in existence that could destroy heaven and earth. In the entire Tiana continent, the number of saint level martial skills could be counted on one hand. Moreover, only the powerful sage sects that truly dominated the Tiana continent could possess such saint-level martial skills. A sage sect like Tianfengshengzong, which only had one saint, definitely didn't have any saint-level martial skills. Xiaochen was surprised by the terror of the tempered battle body, but soon reacted. Listening to Shufeng's words, he wasn't sure about the exact level of the tempered battle body. For a moment, Xiaochen was a little puzzled. Wasn't the tempered battle body created by this old man in front of him? As if seeing the doubts in Xiaochen's heart, Shufeng took the initiative to explain before Xiaochen could open his mouth. "Brat, you guessed right. This 100-tempering battle body was indeed not created by me. Although I was a quasi-saint when I was alive, unfortunately, even a quasi-saint would not be able to create such a peerless technique like the 100-tempering battle body. Moreover, this old man can also tell you that this old man has only cultivated half of the tempered battle body in my entire life, and I didn't really succeed in cultivating it. But even so, this old man still relied on the tempered battle body to become a quasi-sage. Moreover, in this old man's era, I was recognized as the strongest person in the Tiana continent. Even other quasi-sages of the same realm were no match for this old man in terms of physical strength. So, don't underestimate this tempered battle body. Its power is beyond your imagination. Of course, the premise is that you can successfully cultivate it. "Ha, well, since you have passed the test, this old man will impart the tempered battle body to you." Because Xiaochen had successfully cultivated the first layer of the tempered battle body, the golden armor realm, Xu Feng didn't hide anything about the tempered battle body. As soon as his voice fell, Xu Feng bent his finger, and a ray of light instantly entered Xiao Chen's forehead. A huge amount of information was also imprinted in Xiao Chen's mind. What Xu Feng imparted to Xiao Chen was the cultivation method of the tempered battle body. As this information was imprinted in Xiao Chen's mind, Xiao Chen finally truly experienced the terror of the tempered battle body. The tempered battle body was divided into the golden armor realm, the jade organs realm, the heavenly body realm, and the indestructible realm. Xiao Chen was only at the beginning of the golden armor realm. It could be said that he had only just stepped through the threshold of the tempered battle body. This was already enough for Xiao Chen to suffer. It was truly difficult to imagine just how much pain and resources he would have to endure if he wanted to reach the indestructible realm. It was no wonder that even Xu Feng had only reached the Jade Organs realm in his entire life. Xiao Chen looked a little dazed, and it took him a while to come back to his senses. Seeing this, Xu Feng naturally knew what Xiao Chen was thinking. When he first got the tempered battle body, he was also like this, and he was even more shocked than Xiao Chen. Xu Feng smiled. "Kid, now you know how terrifying the tempered battle body is. Alright, I've already given you the tempered battle body. However, this old man still has a fortune to give you. As for whether you can grasp it or not, that will depend on your own ability. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations." Chapter 539. Previously, Xiao Chen had only just touched the threshold of the 100 tempered battle body. Now, after Xu Feng taught Xiao Chen the entire 100 tempered battle body, Xiao Chen truly understood the horror and mystery of the 100 tempered battle body. The 100 tempered battle body was indeed worthy of being called a peerless cultivation technique. Xiao Chen also believed that Xu Feng was not talking nonsense just now. The 100 tempered battle body was at least an existence that surpassed a saint-level cultivation technique, or even higher. Not to mention anything else, after the 100 tempered battle body was cultivated to the extreme, which was the 4th level of the indestructible realm, it was known as the indestructible physical body. One could imagine how strong it was. After a long while, Xiao Chen recovered from the shock. At this time, when he heard that Xu Feng was going to give him a great opportunity, Xiao Chen's eyes flashed with excitement. Noticing the change in Xiao Chen's expression, Xu Feng laughed and scolded, "You little guy, don't think too much. The opportunity that this old man will give you next is naturally far inferior to the 100 tempered battle body, but it is still extremely useful for you now. The greatest opportunity in the 100 tempered valley, the 100 tempered battle body, had already been obtained by Xiao Chen. What Xu Feng was going to give Xiao Chen next was just a drizzle compared to the 100 tempered battle body." Hearing Xu Feng's words, Xiao Chen's face did not show any disappointment. Thinking about it, there was probably no opportunity better than the 100 tempered battle body in the entire Tianhe continent. The harvest of this trip to the 100 tempered valley was far beyond Xiao Chen's expectations. As soon as his voice fell, Xu Feng formed a seal with both hands. Immediately, a talisman array of only 10 square meters appeared in front of Xiao Chen. After the talisman array appeared, Xu Feng said with a smile. "This array is called the Path Array, and it is a saint-level talisman array. However, this array is a one-time use talisman array. The energy in it can only last for 5 days. If you cultivate in this array, with your current cultivation, there is hope that you can break through to the Dao validation realm. However, whether you can succeed or not still depends on your own ability." The Dao Travel Array was a special array formation for its master to break through to the Dao Confirmation realm. Many great forces of the Heavenly River continent had once drawn it. However, the biggest problem with this formation was that it could only be used once. To put it simply, this formation was different from teleportation formations that could be used repeatedly. Once it was inscribed, it could only be used once before it would collapse. Because of this characteristic, the cost of inscribing a formation was very high. This was because a huge amount of resources had been invested, and after inscribing it, it could only be used by one person. Because the Taoist formation consumed a lot of energy and was a one-time use talisman array, many major forces on the Tiana continent also directed them to be used on their top disciples. Even the sage sects were the same. After all, the cost was too high. Even the sage sects couldn't afford it. This Dao travel array was the last good fortune that Xu Feng had given to Xiaochen. Compared to the tempered battle body, this Dao travel array was nothing. It was trash. However, if he could use it to break through to the Dao validation realm, it would be a huge opportunity for Xiaochen. Or perhaps it should be said that if he didn't have the tempered battle body, this Dao travel array would be Xiaochen's greatest harvest in the 100 Refinements Valley. Unfortunately, something as precious as the Dao travel array was nothing in front of the tempered battle god. After briefly explaining the Dao travel array to Xiaochen, Xu Feng's figure began to fade away. Seeing this, Xiaochen called out, "Senior. Ha, boy, this old man is just a remnant soul. Now that the tempered battle body has been inherited, it's time for me to leave. Cultivate well. Once the power of the Dao travel array is exhausted, no matter what the result is, you will be safely sent out of the 100 Refinements Valley." The tempered battle physique had finally found a successor. As such, Xu Feng naturally lost the meaning of staying. At the same time, with Xiaochen obtaining the tempered battle physique, the 100 Refinements Valley would become an ordinary cultivation secret realm. There would no longer be an opportunity like Xiaochen this time. There would only be an ordinary infusion of spirit qi left. Xu Feng laughed heartily. As soon as his laughter fell, he disappeared in front of Xiaochen. Xu Feng was gone, and the last remnant of his soul dissipated between heaven and earth. Xiaochen bowed in Xu Feng's direction. He didn't say anything. This time, he had obtained a great opportunity from Xu Feng, but Xiaochen couldn't help him. He could only hope that he would have a safe journey. After calming his mind, Xiaochen roughly studied the cultivation method of the tempered battle body. Soon, he felt helpless. The amount of resources needed to cultivate the tempered battle body was simply astronomical. Xiaochen had already set foot in the golden armor realm, but the gap between him and the jade internal organs realm was shocking. Therefore, it was probably impossible to improve the tempered battle body in a short time. For the time being, it was impossible to improve the tempered battle body. Xiaochen slowly walked into the Dao travel array and sat down cross-legged. As soon as Xiaochen sat down, the Dao travel array was activated. A golden light soared into the sky, enveloping Xiaochen's body. At the same time as Xiaochen entered the Dao travel array, Gu Lingyao was also sitting cross-legged in a Dao travel array in Gu Qi's residence. If Xiaochen was here, he would definitely recognize that this was a Dao travel array. Gu Qi had also carved a Dao travel array for Gu Lingyao to help him break through to the Dao validation realm. Of course, Gu Qi had spent a lot to carve this Dao travel array. Therefore, with the strength of Tianqi sect, it was only enough to carve this Dao travel array. Obviously, Chao He didn't have this opportunity. Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao were both relying on the help of the Dao travel array to break through to the Dao validation realm, making the final preparations for the upcoming sage sect selection. However, Gu Lingyao's Dao travel array was given by Gu Qi, while Xiaochen's Dao travel array was given by Xu Feng. Time passed day by day, and the day of the sage sect selection drew closer and closer. Xiaochen did not know how long he had been cultivating in the Wei formation. On this day, the aura on Xiaochen's body finally changed, and the barrier of the Wei-proving realm in his body was broken. Breakthrough, his cultivation had finally broken through. From the Dao querying realm, he had broken through to the Dao validation realm. The Dao validation realm was a whole new realm. Without a doubt, the breakthrough of a major realm caused Xiaochen's strength to change dramatically. His aura rose steadily. Finally, after a full quarter of an hour, Xiaochen's aura slowly stabilized at the Dao validation realm. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly to reveal a smile. This trip to the 100 Refinements Valley was simply unexpected. Not only did his cultivation level rise from the Tao querying realm all the way to the Tao validation realm, but he also obtained a peerless body tempering cultivation technique, the 100 Refinements Battle Body. It could be said that this trip to the Valley of 100 Refinements was worth more than a decade of Xiao Chen's hard work, and this was not even taking into account the 100 Refinements Battle Body. Otherwise, he really did not know how to evaluate this trip to the Valley of 100 Refinements. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 540. It could be said that Xiao Chen had earned a lot from this trip to the 100 Refinements Valley. His strength had undergone an earth-shattering change. He slowly opened his eyes with a faint smile on his lips. This trip is really worth it. Just as Xiao Chen's cultivation base broke through, the Taoist formation also slowly disappeared. Just as Xu Feng had said, this Taoist formation was a one-time use talisman formation. It would automatically disappear after being used. The power of the Taoist formation was exhausted, but Xiao Chen's cultivation base had also successfully broken through. At this moment, a powerful repulsive force enveloped Xiao Chen. Obviously, the power of law in the 100 Refinements Valley wanted to forcefully send Xiao Chen out. In more than a month, Xiao Chen had obtained unexpected benefits in the 100 Refinements Valley. Before leaving, Xiao Chen bowed to the front and said, "Senior Xu Feng, Junior Xiao Chen is leaving." "Senior, don't worry. The 100 Refinements Battle Body is in Junior's hands. I will definitely not disgrace it." Following Xiao Chen's words, his body slowly disappeared as he was sent out by the power of law in the 100 Refinements Valley. Just as Xiao Chen was about to leave the 100 Refinements Valley, a total of 60 supreme disciples of the Tianqi sect had already gathered in the Tianqi sect's Sect Masters Square. At the same time, Chao He and Gu Lingyao stood at the front while Gu Qi and the elders of the Tianqi sect appeared one after another. However, Gu Qi had an anxious look on his face. Today was already the day to rush to the Glory Sect selection, but Xiao Chen still had not come out of the 100 Refinements Valley. This made Gu Qi a little anxious. What's going on with this kid? Could something have happened to him? Gu Qi thought to himself. There was no time to wait. If they did not set off today, the Tianqi sect would not be able to make it in time for the Glory Sect selection. Seeing Gu Qi's ugly expression, Great Elder Tian Guochuan said helplessly, "Sect Master, I'm afraid there's no time to wait. If we wait any longer, we won't be able to make it in time." Because they were leaving for the Glory Sect selection today, Tian Guochuan did not continue to wait at the back of the mountain. Hearing Tian Guochuan's words, Gu Qi nodded his head with an ugly expression. Indeed, they could not wait any longer. He was about to give the order to set off. Seeing this, Gu Lingyao below, after going through the 100 Refinements Valley and the Dao Travel Array, Gu Lingyao successfully broke through to the Dao Validation Realm. As for Chao He, she was still at the Lesser Perfection Dao Querying Realm. This was the difference in cultivation resources. Logically speaking, Chao He was also a king of pride. Even if her talent was not as good as Gu Lingyao's, the difference should not be too great. But now, due to the difference in cultivation resources, Chao He was left behind by Gu Lingyao. This was the foundation of a large sect, and this was the terrifying aspect of cultivation resources. However, when a large sect decided to give the majority of its cultivation resources to a single disciple, that disciple's rate of improvement would be unimaginable. In a short period of time, it was completely possible for a qualitative improvement to occur, just like Gu Lingyao. With the help of Gu Qi's Tianqi sect's cultivation resources, Gu Lingyao broke through to the Dao Validation Realm and widened the gap between him and Chao He. Therefore, even if one was a king of pride and had a talent that others looked up to, without cultivation resources, one could only watch helplessly as the gap between them widened. In fact, Gu Qi naturally wanted to nurture Chao He. But unfortunately, Tianqi sect's strength was not enough for both Gu Lingyao and Chao He to break through to the Dao Validation Realm at the same time. Therefore, he had to give up on one of them and focus on nurturing the other. Between Gu Lingyao and Chao He, Gu Qi naturally chose Gu Lingyao without hesitation. Of course, it was not only Tianqi sect that was like this. All the other large sects in Tianfeng Prefecture were the same. In the final sprint before the Glory sect selection, all the large sects could only choose to take out all their cultivation resources and pour them heavily on one disciple. Only then could that disciple lead the others to achieve good results during the Glory sect selection. Even though his cultivation base and combat strength had increased tremendously, Gu Lingyao did not have the slightest bit of joy on his face. Instead, he was filled with worry as he cursed in his heart. "Stupid Xiaochen, what's wrong with you? If you don't come now, you won't be able to make it." Gu Lingyao was worried about Xiaochen. After all, they were about to set off. If Xiaochen did not make it, he would miss the Glory sect selection. Gu Lingyao was worried, but there was nothing he could do. Seeing that Xiaochen still did not appear, Gu Qi helplessly took a deep breath and shouted, "I hope you can achieve good results for our Tianqi sect in this Glory sect selection. Alright, let's go." As soon as Gu Qi finished speaking, the teleportation formation on the main square lit up with a beam of light that shot into the sky. Then, under the lead of Tian Guochuan and the other two Dao Emperor Realm Elders, the disciples participating in the Glory sect selection walked into the teleportation formation and disappeared. They could not wait any longer. But before they left, Gu Lingyao and Mu Feng both looked towards the back mountain of Tianqi sect. Unfortunately, even at the last moment, Xiaochen still did not make it. Soon, everyone disappeared through the teleportation formation. Then, the teleportation formation closed. Gu Qi sighed and said helplessly, "Still didn't make it." Gu Qi was naturally talking about Xiaochen. In the end, he still did not make it. But at this moment, an elder beside Gu Qi cried out in surprise. "Sect Master, look! The back mountain, the back mountain," the elder suddenly cried out in surprise. Hearing this, Gu Qi also looked towards the back mountain. The black door that was originally towering in the sky was actually starting to disappear slowly. When the black door disappeared, Gu Qi immediately disappeared from the spot and rushed towards the back mountain. With Gu Qi's speed, he arrived at the back mountain in an instant. At this moment, the black door had already disappeared, and on the peak of the back mountain, Xiaochen in white appeared before Gu Qi's eyes. He was finally out. But after sensing that Xiaochen's cultivation had also broken through to the Dao validation realm, Gu Qi was stunned at first. But soon, he revealed a smile and said, "Seems like this kid has also gotten a lot of benefits. I wonder if he got the tempered battle body. If he did, this kid would probably soar to the sky." Gu Qi was very happy with Xiaochen's appearance because with Xiaochen around, Tianqi sect would have a greater chance of winning the Glory sect selection this time. Taking a step forward, he instantly appeared in front of Xiaochen. Upon seeing Gu Qi, Xiaochen bowed and called out, "Sect Master. You're finally willing to come out, little guy? Cut the crap and follow me. The others have already rushed to the Glory sect selection. You should go too, or you won't make it in time." Gu Qi had a lot of questions to ask Xiaochen, but time was of the essence. Moreover, Gu Qi did not intend to delve into the matter of the tempered battle body. Therefore, as soon as they met, Gu Qi brought Xiaochen to the main square without any explanation. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 541. Gu Qi did not ask Xiaochen anything about the 100 Refinements Valley. Although Gu Qi knew what was in the 36th heaven of the 100 Refinements Valley, he also knew very well that with his conditions, it was impossible for him to cultivate the 100 Refinements battle body, even if he had now broken through to the Saint Realm. Therefore, it made no difference to Gu Qi whether he asked or not. Now that the Sage sect selection had begun, the others had already left. Xiaochen naturally had to catch up as soon as possible. If he missed the time, he would not be able to participate in the Sage sect selection this time. Gu Qi brought Xiaochen directly to the main square. In just a few breaths' time, Gu Qi returned with Xiaochen following behind him. The few elders who were still in the main square had a change in expression. "Sect Master, Xiaochen," no one expected Xiaochen to appear at this juncture. Tian Guochuan and the others had already left with the large group. Without wasting any time, Gu Qi immediately shouted, "Activate the teleportation formation and send Xiao Chen to the Tianfeng Prefecture city. Zhang Tong, you are responsible for protecting Xiao Chen all the way to the Tianfeng Prefecture city." Once again, Gu Qi activated the teleportation formation and sent another elder to protect Xiao Chen all the way to the Tianfeng Prefecture city. Hearing Gu Qi's words, the elder called Zhang Tong responded respectfully. The teleportation portal was soon activated again. Xiao Chen entered the portal under the protection of Zhang Tong. Before he left, Gu Qi seemed to have guessed what Xiao Chen was thinking, so he said, "Don't worry about it. Time is of the essence. Chat with Elder Zhang as you walk. Elder Zhang will tell you the rules of the sage sect selection on the way." Xiao Chen knew nothing about the rules of the sage sect selection. However, after hearing Gu Qi's words, Xiao Chen still nodded slightly. The distance from the celestial equal sect to the Tianfeng Prefecture city was very far. Along the way, one would have to switch between teleportation formations several times. If one were to rely on manpower, even a Dao Emperor would need half a month. This showed how far the distance between the two places was. Under Zhang Tong's protection, there was nothing to worry about. At the same time, Zhang Tong had also informed Xiao Chen of the rules of the Glory Sect selection. Firstly, the location of the Glory Sect selection was in Tianfeng Prefecture city. Just from the name itself, one would know that this was the center of Tianfeng Prefecture. It was also the largest and most prosperous city in Tianfeng Prefecture, directly under Tianfeng Xingzong. Furthermore, Tianfeng Xingzong's mountain gate was built on Tianfeng Sacred Mountain not far from Tianfeng Prefecture city. Every time the Glory Sect selection started, all the major forces within the Tianfeng Prefecture would send out their disciples. Of course, there was a limit to the number of disciples that each force could send out. For example, Tianqi sect had 70 spots. However, with Tianqi sect as an example, out of the 70 spots, only 10 of them were qualified to participate in the sage sect selection. As for the other 60 spots, they were called vassals. The simplest explanation for being vassals was that they would not participate in the sage sect selection. Furthermore, Tianfeng Xingzong would not care about their performance in the sage sect selection. The reason why these vassals would participate in the sage sect selection was to help the 10 participants enter Tianfeng Xingzong successfully and achieve good results in the sage sect selection. This was also the rule set by Tianfeng Xingzong. As for why this was the case, it was because of the location of the sage sect selection, the Dark Prison Secret Realm. Every time the sage sect selection was held in the Dark Prison Secret Realm, the Dark Prison Secret Realm was a place that Tianfeng Xingzong specially used to imprison criminals. It was a small independent world. For example, some martial artists who had committed heinous crimes, or some demonic beasts, as long as they were captured by Tianfeng Xingzong would imprison them in the Dark Prison Secret Realm. These criminals who were imprisoned in the Dark Prison Secret Realm naturally became the test mission for Xiao Chen and the others. According to the rules of the sage sect selection, after entering the Dark Prison Secret Realm, each participant could use any method to kill the criminals in the Dark Prison Secret Realm. Every time they killed a criminal, they would be able to obtain a certain amount of points. If a vassal killed a criminal, they could voluntarily hand over the points to any participant. As such, at the end of the sage sect selection, the person with the highest points would naturally be able to enter Tianfeng Xingzong, and could even become a core disciple directly. According to the different cultivation realms, the points obtained after each criminal was killed would be different. Of course, one could also choose to steal the points from other forces. Don't think that the criminals locked up in the Dark Prison Secret Realm were simple. One had to know that to be locked up in the Dark Prison Secret Realm meant that one had committed heinous crimes. None of the criminals in the Dark Prison Secret Realm were easy missions. At the same time, there were also those with high cultivation realms. Of course, in order to ensure the unity of the sage sect selection, martial artists of Dao King realm and above were all locked up separately. In other words, during the selection period, the highest they would meet would only be Dao Transformation realm martial artists. But this was already very ridiculous. Perhaps it was because of this reason that Tianfeng created some vassals, giving more spots to the various forces. After all, if the number of vassals was too small, then participants like Xiaochen who had entered the Dark Prison's secret realm would have a hard time surviving. Secondly, the reason for increasing the number of vassals was to test the participants' commanding abilities. After all, a disciple of Tianfeng not only had to be strong, but also couldn't be weak in other aspects. This sage sect selection was to test one's cohesiveness, commanding ability, judgment, and so on. Therefore, whether or not one could command these vassals to achieve good results was also a test for the participants. After all, in the environment of the Dark Prison secret realm, it was impossible to rely on one person. This was because the cultivation realms of the criminals were all higher than the participants. Therefore, if one wanted to kill them, they could only rely on teamwork. Of course, the true monsters were not included in this list. After explaining the sage sect selection to Xiaochen in detail, Xiaochen and Zhang Tong successfully arrived at Tianfeng Prefecture City a day later. Stepping out of the transportation portal of Tianfeng Prefecture City, Xiaochen's eyes were filled with awe as he looked at the largest city in the entire Tianfeng Prefecture City. Although he could only see the corner of Tianfeng Prefecture City's clothes, Xiaochen could only use one word to describe such a city: magnificent. That's right, Tianfeng Prefecture City gave off the feeling of magnificence. Compared to Tianfeng Prefecture City, Wuyue Empire's capital city and Tianlang Empire's capital city were like small villages deep in the mountains. Tianfeng Prefecture City was so huge that it was impossible to describe it properly. Let's put it this way. Xiaochen and Zhang Tong were currently at the west side of Tianfeng Prefecture City. However, if they wanted to head to the east side, even if they were to fly, with Xiaochen's speed, it would still take them at least a day. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 542. Because the Tianfeng Prefecture City was too big, short-distance teleportation formations could be seen everywhere in the Tianfeng Prefecture City. These short-distance teleportation arrays only had one purpose, and that was to teleport within the Tianfeng Prefecture. Because these teleportation arrays had a short teleportation distance, they did not consume many spirit stones. Therefore, they were basically never shut down. Moreover, the cost of using these teleportation arrays was not too expensive. Ordinary warriors could afford them. After witnessing the grandeur of the Tianfeng Prefecture City, Zhang Tong led the two of them to a small courtyard of the Celestial Equal Sect in the Tianfeng Prefecture City through the short-distance teleportation formations in the city. This was the first time Xiaochen had seen a city that could use teleportation formations to build an entire transportation system within the city. These short-distance teleportation formations were completely connected to the Tianfeng Prefecture City. While he was still in shock, Zhang Tong had already knocked on the courtyard door. This courtyard had already been bought by the Tianqi sect. As one of the major sects within the Tianfeng Prefecture City, the Tianqi sect naturally had their own property in the Tianfeng Prefecture City. Not only the Tianqi sect, but other sects like the Qingyang sect also had their own property. Even the Wuyue Empire had one. As Zhang Tong gently knocked on the courtyard door, it was quickly opened. An elder of the Tianqi sect stood in front of the door. Seeing that it was Zhang Tong and Xiaochen, his face lit up with joy. Elder Zhang and Xiaochen, you've come out of the 100 Refinements Valley? Obviously, this elder was surprised to see Xiaochen here. Hearing this, Zhang Tong smiled and said, I'm under the orders of the sect master to bring Xiaochen to the Tianfeng Prefecture City. After this, I'll stay in the Tianfeng Prefecture City with you guys and wait for the sacred sect selection to end. That's great, that's great. Come in quickly. Hearing Zhang Tong's words, the elder nodded with a smile on his face. Then, he turned sideways and invited Xiaochen and Zhang Tong into the courtyard. The courtyard was not big, but it was not small either. There was no problem for hundreds of people to stay here. He brought Xiaochen all the way to the main courtyard. At this moment, Gu Lingyao and the other 69 prodigious disciples were sitting in a circle in the main courtyard. Tian Guochuan was explaining something to everyone. First Elder, Zhang Tong has brought Xiaochen here. Oh, is Xiaochen here? Okay. Hearing that Xiaochen was here, Tian Guochuan smiled and looked at Xiaochen, who was walking behind him. Xiaochen's appearance naturally made Tian Guochuan happy. When Xiaochen arrived in front of him, Tian Guochuan said with a smile, "You've come at the right time. Find a place to sit under the table. I'm telling them what they need to pay attention to in the glory sect selection. Listen carefully, it's very useful." The glory sect selection was about to begin in 3 days. Tian Guochuan naturally needed to inform everyone about the things they needed to pay attention to so that they wouldn't participate in the glory sect selection without knowing anything. Upon hearing Tian Guochuan's words, Xiaochen nodded slightly and then found a place to sit cross-legged among the crowd. While Xiaochen was talking to Tian Guochuan, all the genius disciples were secretly sizing up Xiaochen. After this trip to the 100 Refinements Valley, everyone suddenly realized that they couldn't see through Xiaochen at all. In fact, they couldn't even sense Xiaochen's cultivation state. Could it be that this fella is also? Even Chao He couldn't see through Xiaochen's cultivation state. A complicated look flashed through her eyes. Chao He naturally knew that she couldn't see through Xiaochen's cultivation state. In her heart, she guessed that Xiaochen had also broken through to the Dao validation realm like Gu Lingyao. There were a total of 3 genius kings in the celestial equal sect. But now that Gu Lingyao had broken through to the Dao validation realm, and Xiaochen was suspected to have broken through to the Dao validation realm as well. If not, with Chao He's cultivation state, there was no way she couldn't sense Xiaochen's cultivation state. Her heart was filled with bitterness. In the blink of an eye, the gap between Gu Lingyao and Xiaochen had widened. Now, in front of Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao, Chao He probably couldn't even last 10 moves. Of course, even if he did, Xiaochen wouldn't have thought too much about it. The path of cultivation was like sailing against the current. If you didn't advance, you would fall behind. Chao He didn't grab hold of the opportunity, and the gap between him and Gu Lingyao widened. Who else could she blame? Sitting down cross-legged, Xiaochen didn't care about the gazes of the surrounding disciples. He looked at Tian Guochuan and listened attentively to his explanation of the glory sect selection. At the start, it was all unimportant stuff. It was nothing more than the threats in the darkness prison secret realm. After about an hour, Tian Guochuan finally finished explaining the situation in the darkness prison secret realm. Then, he shifted the topic to the various major powers in the Tianfeng prefecture. You all know that Danyan County is one of the 7 counties under the jurisdiction of the Tianfeng prefecture. You should be clear about the situation in Danyan County. After all, there are only 2 major sects in Danyan County, our Celestial Equal sect and Qingyang sect. But other than Danyan County, do you know about the other 6 counties? Tian Guochuan said slowly. Hearing his words, everyone's interest was piqued, including Xiaochen. That's right, all the major powers in the Tianfeng prefecture would participate in the glory sect selection. As for the other major powers, including Xiaochen, no one knew anything about them. Sensing the change in everyone's gazes, Tian Guochuan smiled slightly. He didn't keep them in suspense and introduced the major powers in the Tianfeng prefecture in detail. According to Tian Guochuan, other than Danyan County, there were a total of 16 sects in the 7 counties under the jurisdiction of the Tianfeng prefecture. These 16 sects all had half-step sages. But the ones that needed the most attention were the 3 major sections. These 3 sects were known to be second only to Tianfeng Xingzong in the Tianfeng prefecture. There was more than 1 half-step sage in each sect. Of course, these 3 sects were known to be the strongest because Gu Qi's true cultivation had not been exposed. Otherwise, the Celestial Equal sect would also be a glory sect. The 3 sects that needed the most attention were the Evil Demon Temple, the White Mist sect, and the Iron Sword sect. In the past, these 3 sects had the best results in the glory sect selection. In the Darkness Prison secret realm, anyone who encountered these three sects would basically have all their points snatched away. After explaining the situation of the evil demon temple, the White Mist sect, and the Iron Sword sect to everyone, Tianguochuan finally said with a serious face. Moreover, according to reliable sources, the evil demon temple, the White Mist sect, and the Iron Sword sect all have good seedlings in this glory sect selection. These three sects have also done their best to draw the tripartite formation. In other words, the evil demon temple, the White Mist sect, and the Iron Sword sect should have at least 3 disciples who have the strength of the Tao validation realm. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 543. The Skywind Mansion had 7 counties under its jurisdiction. Within the 7 counties, there were a total of 18 sects that had half-step saints. The strongest amongst them were the evil demon temple, the White Mist sect, and the Iron Sword sect. Not only were their strengths the strongest, but they also possessed the deepest resources. For the sage sect selection, all the sects would definitely bring out their trump cards. With the support of all the resources, there would definitely be many talented disciples who would stand out. Their strength would increase by leaps and bounds in a short period of time. Just like Gu Lingyao and Shaochen from Tianqi sect, they had broken through to Dao verification realm in less than 2 months. Of course, Shaochen's breakthrough did not consume much of Tianqi sect's resources. It was all thanks to Shufeng's help. Otherwise, with Tianqi sect's foundation, it would not be enough for 2 talented disciples to break through to Dao verification realm at the same time. Tianguochuan explained the situation of all the major sects in Tianfeng Mansion to everyone in detail. Especially the 3 sects, Demon Evil Temple, and Tianqi sect. Tianguochuan repeatedly reminded them to avoid them as much as possible. Not only were these 3 sects strong, but they also had the most people. As everyone knew, every time the sage sect selection began, the number of people entering the Abyss Prison's secret realm would be determined by Tianfeng Xingzong. For example, Tianqi sect only had 70 people, 60 of whom were vassals. However, for Demon Evil Temple and Demon Evil Temple, they each had 100 people entering the Abyss Prison's secret realm. 20 of them were contestants, and 80 of them were vassals. With such a huge difference in numbers and the strength of the 3 sects, it was naturally unwise to fight them head-on. After telling everyone the things they needed to pay attention to, they did not run around for the next few days. Instead, they waited quietly in their residences for the sage sect selection to begin. 3 days passed by quickly. Early in the morning, all the major sects that had arrived at Tianfeng Mansion City in advance rushed towards Tianfeng's Sacred Mountain. Like the other sects, Tianqi sect also rushed to Tianfeng's Sacred Mountain through the transportation array under the lead of Tianguochuan and the other 3 elders. From the Tianfeng Prefecture City, there was a teleportation array that led directly to the foot of the Tianfeng Sacred Mountain. Of course, there was no way for them to ascend the Tianfeng Sacred Mountain. They could only wait at the foot of the mountain. At the same time, the Tianfeng Xingzong people would open the entrance to the Hell Prison's secret realm. It didn't take long for Shaochen and the others to arrive at the foot of Skywind's Sacred Mountain in less than an hour. However, when they stepped out of the teleportation array, many people had already gathered around them. These people were divided into different factions. When the Tianqi sect appeared, there were naturally people who came to greet Tianguochuan and the other 3 elders. Tianguochuan smiled and responded to these people. However, this casual conversation was constantly filled with the smell of gunpowder. Tianfeng Xingzong's people hadn't appeared yet, so everyone could only wait patiently. While everyone was waiting, the teleportation array lit up again, and a group of bald monks wearing monks' robes walked out of the array. This was a group of monks, but they didn't have the kindness of monks. On the contrary, they gave people the impression that they were very ferocious and tyrannical. This was the Evil Demon Temple. With the arrival of the Evil Demon Temple, everyone present was slightly stunned. At the same time, the leader of the Evil Demon Temple was actually a half-step saint expert. As mentioned before, the Evil Demon Temple, the White Mist Sect, and the Iron Swords Sect didn't only have one half-step saint expert. After glancing at the crowd indifferently, the half-step saint expert of the Evil Demon Temple silently came to the front of the crowd. Not long after the Evil Demon Temple's arrival, the people of the White Mist Sect and the Iron Swords Sect also appeared one after another. Like the Evil Demon Temple, the leaders of these two sects were also half-step saints. When the three sects gathered, they stood at the front of the crowd. The other forces consciously chose to retreat. There was no other way. The strength of these three sects was second only to the windless Sacred Sect. They couldn't be provoked. The 18 sects of the Tianfeng Mansion had all arrived. At this moment, two old men wearing Tianfeng Xingzong clothes appeared on the scene. Both of them were half-step saints. Seeing the appearance of these two old men, even the leaders of the Evil Demon Temple and the other two sects lowered their heads and bowed respectfully. Greetings, elders. These two were the elders of Tianfeng Xingzong. Their cultivation was at the half-step saint level. Facing the greetings of the crowd, one of the old men smiled and said, "Everyone, there's no need to be so courteous." As his voice fell, the two elders of Tianfeng Xingzong didn't waste any time. They directly took out a token and opened the entrance of the Dark Prison's secret realm. The sacred sect selection would also last for a month. During this month, everyone would enter the Dark Prison's secret realm to compete for points. Of course, everything that happened in the Dark Prison's secret realm would be clearly seen by the outside world. As the Dark Prison's secret realm opened, the two elders of Tianfeng Xingzong shouted in unison, "Everyone, go in." As their voices fell, the disciples of the various sects rushed into the Dark Prison's secret realm. On the Tianqi sect's side, Tian Guochuan looked at the disciples and said in a deep voice, "Remember, the Dark Prison's secret realm isn't like our Tianqi sect's secret realm. There's real danger in it. Not only are there prisoners and demonic beasts imprisoned in the Dark Prison's secret realm, but the disciples of the other sects are also your opponents. You must not let your guard down. You must know how to be united." After speaking, Tian Guochuan looked at Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao and said, "This time, it's up to the two of you." Hearing Tian Guochuan's words, Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao nodded slightly. Then, under the lead of Xiaochen and Gu Lingyao, the people of the Tianqi sect also rushed into the Dark Prison's secret realm. Soon, all the disciples of the 18 major sects had entered the Dark Prison's secret realm. Only the elders of the various sects who were responsible for protecting them remained. There were only a few dozen of them. With a smile on his face, the Tianfeng Xingzong elder who spoke earlier said, "Let's go, everyone. We'll go up the mountain together and see how these little guys perform." The disciples had already entered the Dark Prison's secret realm, and these old fellows had also been invited to the Tianfeng Xingzong. In the main hall of Tianfeng Xingzong, Tian Guochuan and the other experts of the various sects had gathered. At the same time, there was a huge light screen in the center of the hall. Through this light screen, they could clearly see the scene in the Dark Prison's secret realm. At the same time, everyone present could clearly see what was happening in the Dark Prison's secret realm. Everyone took their seats. At this time, the half-saint expert of the Iron Swords sect took the lead and said, "The old rules apply. No matter what happens in the Dark Prison's secret realm, no one is allowed to take revenge. Whoever dies in the Dark Prison's secret realm can only blame themselves for not being strong enough. Everyone has no objections, right?" Chapter 544. Now that the Glory sect selection had begun, many disciples from various sects had gathered together. Furthermore, the Heavenly Wind Saint sect did not forbid killing between disciples. Therefore, every time the Glory sect selection began, many disciples would die within the Hell's secret grounds. Some of these people were killed by the prisoners and demonic beasts in the Darkness Prison's secret realm, while others were killed by the disciples of other sections. Such an intense massacre would inevitably lead to animosity between the sections. Therefore, many of them had agreed that no matter what happened in the Darkness Prison's secret realm, After hearing the words of the half-saint expert from the devil-evil temple, the crowd nodded their heads in agreement. This was already a rule that did not need to be said. At the same time, the Heavenly Wind Sacred Sect had also clearly stated that if any sect were to seek revenge because of what happened in the Black Prison Secret Realm, they would be punished by the Heavenly Wind Sacred Sect. Seeing everyone nod their heads, the half-saint from the Devil's Temple smiled and looked at the light screen. All the disciples of the various sects had already entered the Dark Prison Secret Realm. At this moment, Shaochen appeared in a dense forest with only 8 disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect following him. When entering the Darkness Prison Secret Realm, everyone would be separated. This was no secret. Naturally, all the sects had their own ways to deal with this. Looking at the disciples beside him, Shaochen said softly, "Send the signal." In order to gather their disciples in the shortest time possible, the Celestial Equal Sect had specially made a signal talisman. Hearing Shaochen's words, the Celestial Equal Sect disciple nodded his head and took out a talisman from his storage ring. After activating it, the talisman turned into a ball of fire and shot straight into the sky before exploding. This was the signal from the Celestial Equal Sect, telling the surrounding disciples to gather here. Since the signal had been sent out, Shaochen and the rest waited at the same spot. They did not know how many disciples would come, but Shaochen only planned to wait for a day. After a day, no matter how many people came, he would begin to venture deeper into the Darkness Prison Secret Realm. A day passed quickly. During this time, the disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect had also arrived at Shaochen and the rest. A total of 23 disciples had gathered around Shaochen. This was not a small number. What made Shaochen the happiest was that Mufeng had also come. This was great. As a peerless genius, Mufeng had also obtained a place in the competition. Seeing that he had already gathered so many disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect, he guessed that Gu Lingyao's side would also gather more people. From the looks of it, it was still all right. The disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect were divided into 2 groups. Moreover, as they continued to explore the depths of the Abyss Secret Realm, they would definitely meet each other. "Let's go." Slowly getting up, Shaochen said to the people around him. Hearing Shaochen's words, the crowd naturally had no objections. They immediately followed Shaochen and soared into the sky, heading deeper into the Darkness Prison Secret Realm. The Darkness Prison Secret Realm was very big and dark. It was as if the creator had already determined the main color of this small world when he created it. The sky was dusky at all times, and the drizzle never stopped. As a result, the entire Dark Prison Secret Realm was extremely damp and gloomy. The ground and the mountains were all black when seen from afar. It was an extremely uncomfortable sight. But then again, it made sense. The Dark Prison Secret Realm was originally a small world used to imprison prisoners and demonic beasts. To put it bluntly, the Dark Prison Secret Realm was an enlarged version of a prison. However, compared to a prison, the Dark Prison Secret Realm was much bigger. Along the way, Mufeng and the other 2 participants followed Shaochen closely. One of them said to Shaochen with a thoughtful expression, "Senior brother Shaochen, if we want to quickly accumulate points, I'm afraid we have to go to the prison city." The prison city was a city unique to the Darkness Prison Secret Realm. In the Darkness Prison Secret Realm, the number of prisoners was not small. There were at least 100,000 prisoners. Including the demonic beasts, the total number of prisoners was probably more than 200,000. However, even though there were 200,000 prisoners and demonic beasts, the Darkness Prison Secret Realm was simply too big. Therefore, it was not easy to find them all. This was because the prisoners would not wander around the Darkness Prison Secret Realm alone. In order to survive here, the prisoners and demonic beasts would often gather and form Prison City in the Darkness Prison Secret Realm. Although the prison city looked like a city on the surface, it was actually a gathering place for the prisoners. They built simple wooden huts and formed a city scattered all over the Darkness Prison Secret Realm. The best way to quickly accumulate points was to attack these prison city. After all, in each prison city, there were at least hundreds and thousands of prisoners gathered together. If one could kill all of them, the points would obviously be a lot. However, attacking Prison City was also very dangerous because these prisoners were not to be trifled with. If they were not a match for them, they would go for wool and come home shorn. Not only would they not be able to obtain any points, they might even lose their lives there. One must know that these prodigious disciples were not the only ones who wanted to kill the prisoners to gain points. The prisoners would also not show any mercy to Xiao Chen and the other prodigious disciples. Once they had the chance, they would definitely kill them. After hearing this disciple say that they should attack the prison city, Xiao Chen pondered for a moment before asking. Let's look around first. If there is a small prison city, we can take action. However, if it is a large prison city, I'm afraid it will be very dangerous for the 20 of us. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, the disciple nodded in agreement. Indeed, if they were to encounter a large prison city, Xiao Chen and the other 20 disciples were obviously not enough. The group searched along the way and soon, they left the dense forest and arrived at a plain. This was a black plain where not even a blade of grass grew. Perhaps because the ground was too wet, it had already turned black. Xiao Chen walked along the plain toward the depths of the dark dungeon arcane realm. When he arrived at the mansion on the plain, Xiao Chen could feel the aftershocks of a battle from afar. There is a battle in front. Be careful. Let's go and take a look. There were people fighting in front of them. However, he did not know if it was a battle between the sect disciples and the prisoners or an internal battle between the sect disciples. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, the group cautiously walked forward. Soon, the group arrived at the place where the battle had erupted. From afar, Xiao Chen could see two groups of people engaged in an intense battle. One group of people was wearing the clothes of the sect disciples, while the other group was wearing clothes that did not cover their bodies. It was obvious that they were the prisoners of the Darkness Prison secret realm. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 545. They stopped far away and watched the intense battle. At the same time, a celestial equal sect disciple beside Xiao Chen whispered, "Senior brother Xiao Chen, they are disciples of the Fire God sect." Through the clothes on their bodies, Xiao Chen quickly determined that the people fighting with these death row prisoners were the disciples of the Fire God school of the Skywind Mansion. However, Xiao Chen did not pay attention to them at this moment. On the contrary, Xiao Chen's gaze had fallen on these death row prisoners from the beginning. Compared to the Fire God sect, Xiao Chen was clearly more interested in the prisoners in the Hell secret realm. There was no other reason other than that they were the targets of the Glory sect's selection this time. After some observation, even though the clothes on the prisoners were tattered, every single one of them was emitting a thick stench of blood when they fought. With a single glance, one could tell that they were people whose hands were stained with blood. Their attacks were even more ruthless. Prisoners who could be locked up in the Hell secret realm were definitely evil people. Facing them, the disciples of the Fire God sect could not hold on any longer. Both sides had about the same number of people. There were about 20 disciples of the Fire God sect. Similarly, there were only about 20 prisoners they were facing. Both sides were engaged in an intense battle. At this moment, the Fire God sect was gradually at a disadvantage. That's strange. Why isn't there a king of pride who has broken through to the Tao validation realm in the Fire God sect? Looking at the people of the Fire God sect, Mu Feng asked with a puzzled expression. Every time the Glory sect selection began, the various sects of the Skywind Mansion would take out a huge amount of resources to allow one or a few disciples to break through and improve quickly. Just like Guling Yao. Logically speaking, the Fire God School should at least have a king of geniuses that had broken through to the Tao validation realm to hold down the fort. Unfortunately, there wasn't a king of geniuses at the Tao validation realm amongst these 20 disciples of the Fire God School. Perhaps the situation of the Fire God School is the same as ours. They're just unlucky. Up until now, they haven't met the main group of their Fire God School, said a disciple from the Celestial Equal sect beside Mu Feng. While everyone was talking, the situation of the Fire God School became more and more dangerous. Without a true king of prides holding the fort, the disciples of the Fire God School were clearly not a match for the group of death row prisoners in front of them. Originally, he didn't plan to help. After all, Xiaochen wasn't a saint, and he wasn't related to the Fire God School in any way, so naturally, he couldn't help them. However, when Xiaochen's gaze swept past the disciples of the Fire God School, with a single glance, Xiaochen saw quite a few familiar figures within the group of disciples. Xiaochen recognized the 5 disciples from the Fire God sect. All of them were from the heavenly Qin mainland. One of them was even a peerless heavens chosen from 9 Firmament's palace. Previously, Xiaochen had already considered the possibility of meeting people from the Tianqian continent in the Glory Sect's selection. Seeing the 5 of them, Xiaochen could no longer stand idly by. Without any hesitation, he shouted in a low voice, "Let's go and help them." Upon hearing Xiaochen's sudden decision to save these disciples of the Fire God School, although the disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect were puzzled, they didn't say much. After the trip to the 100 Refinements Valley, Xiaochen's reputation in the Celestial Equal Sect had naturally increased by a lot. Furthermore, these disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect had all been beaten up by Xiaochen before. Faced with Xiaochen's orders, they naturally didn't have the courage to disobey. As soon as he finished speaking, Xiaochen took the lead and charged into the battlefield. The cultivation of this group of death row prisoners was mostly at the Dao-seeking realm. Among them, there were 2 who were at the Dao validation realm, but they were only at the entry realm. Such strength was naturally nothing to Xiaochen. The disciples of the Fire God School, who were originally ashen-faced, saw Xiaochen taking the lead and charging into the battlefield. For a moment, many of them muttered softly in surprise. The King of Celestial Equal Sect? The entry realm of the Dao validation realm? Someone from the Celestial Equal Sect? Because Xiaochen had directly exposed his cultivation, everyone could see that Xiaochen was at the entry realm of the Dao validation realm. In the Darkness Prison Secret Realm, the King of Dao validation realm was considered the strongest in their respective forces. Originally, they were already in a desperate situation, but Xiaochen's sudden appearance gave these Fire God School disciples new hope. However, the ones who were the most excited were naturally the 5 heavenly Qin continent cultivators. They also recognized that the person who came was Xiaochen. At this moment, the 5 of them were stunned on the spot with an excited expression. For the time being, they didn't have the mood to care about the changes in everyone's expression. With the addition of Xiaochen and the disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect, the situation of the battle immediately reversed. The death row prisoners who originally had the upper hand quickly suffered heavy casualties, especially under Xiaochen's hands. Even though these death row prisoners were extremely fierce, they still couldn't cause any waves. Chapter 546. While Xiaochen was chatting with the 5 of them, the other disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect and the Fire God School were standing far away. Although they were curious about what Xiaochen was talking about with them, the disciples of the Fire God School didn't dare to approach, including the King of Prides. There was no other way. Xiaochen was at the initial stage of the Dao confirmation realm. How could these disciples of the Fire God School dare to provoke him? Mufeng naturally followed Xiaochen. After understanding the situation of the 5, they casually chatted for a while. Afterward, Xiaochen and Mufeng returned to the Celestial Equal Sect's camp. The 5 heavenly Qin continent cultivators also returned to the Fire God School's camp. Although he saved their lives, Xiaochen didn't plan to bring them along. First of all, they weren't from the Celestial Equal Sect. Not to mention that it wasn't realistic to bring them along. Most importantly, everyone was currently searching for their own opportunities in the Heavenly River continent. Xiaochen didn't want to interfere too much with others. If he could help, he would help. At most, that was all he could do. When it was time to part, it was unknown what the 5 heavenly Qin continent cultivators said to the King of Prides. After hesitating for a while, the King of Prides took the initiative to approach Xiaochen. "Senior brother Xiaochen, thank you for saving my life this time. Junior brother is willing to repay senior brother with some information about the prison city. Oh, information about the prison city? Xiao Chen's interest was piqued when he heard this proud king from the fire god sect say that he had information about the prison city. The prison city was the best way to quickly accumulate points. Along the way, Xiao Chen and the rest were also paying attention to any news about the prison city. Without hiding anything, the King of Prides told Xiao Chen the truth. According to him, the reason why they were surrounded by those prisoners was because they rashly entered the sphere of influence of the prison city. The prison city was located in the east of this plain. Previously, they had found the prison city by chance. Unfortunately, before they could do anything, they were chased down by the prisoners in the prison city. According to what this proud king of the Fire God School had said, the scale of this prison city wasn't large. At most, there were only 100 or so death row prisoners gathered here, and excluding the 20 death row prisoners that were killed by Xiao Chen and the others earlier, the number of death row prisoners gathered in prison city right now would definitely not exceed 100 people. A prison city of this scale was difficult for the disciples of the Fire God School to defeat. However, if they could join forces with the Celestial Equal sect led by Xiao Chen, it would be a different story. After telling Xiao Chen about the situation of this prison city in detail, Xiao Chen didn't immediately answer after hearing the words of this proud monarch from the Fire God Gate. Instead, he sank into deep thought. Although this prison city was very tempting, its scale wasn't large with less than 100 people. In this way, if the two sides joined forces, it was indeed possible for them to destroy this prison city. However, it didn't mean that they would definitely succeed. This was because in terms of numbers, their side was still slightly lesser. The Celestial Equal sect and the Fire God School added up to less than 50 people. If they wanted to take down this prison city, they would probably have to pay attention to some strategy. After a moment of silence, Xiao Chen looked at the proud monarch from the Fire God School and said, "Junior brother Su Luo, let's go take a look at the situation of the prison city before making any plans." Xiao Chen didn't rashly make a decision. After hearing Xiao Chen's words, Su Luo didn't have any objections. He nodded and replied, "Everything will be decided by senior brother Xiao Chen." Su Luo could be considered an influential figure in the Fire God School. However, it was a pity that his situation was similar to Chao He's. As he didn't receive any resources from the sect, Su Luo's cultivation was still at the lesser completion Dao querying realm. His cultivation wasn't as high as Xiao Chen's and his combat strength was far from Xiao Chen's. Therefore, in this cooperation between the two sides, Xiao Chen naturally became the core of everyone. He was the one who decided on the specific action plan. Facing the respectful Su Luo, Xiao Chen smiled faintly. He then told the Celestial Equal sect's disciples. When they heard that the Fire God School had actually found a prison city and it wasn't large in scale, the Celestial Equal sect's disciples became excited. There was no doubt that as long as they could successfully take down this prison city, the points they would obtain would definitely not be small. Everyone was secretly excited. Then, under Su Luo's lead, everyone headed east. This place wasn't far from the prison city that Su Luo mentioned. In less than 2 hours, everyone arrived at the location of the prison city. This place was already at the edge of the plains, bordering the forest. The prison city was built at the foot of a mountain. Looking from afar, Xiao Chen saw that the place looked like a small village. Wooden houses were clustered together to form the prison city. At the same time, there was a fence made of wood all around, surrounding the many houses. To be honest, this couldn't even be considered a city. However, in the Darkness Prison's secret realm, such a place was called a prison city. Not acting rashly, Xiao Chen and the rest hid behind a huge rock far away as they discussed the action plan. The number of people isn't a problem. However, we don't know the cultivation level of the strongest person in this prison city. If there are prisoners that have surpassed the Dao validation realm, then we can't act rashly. Xiao Chen looked at everyone and said softly. Xiao Chen was most concerned about the cultivation level of the strongest person in this prison city. This was the most important thing. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Suluo said with a serious expression. When we were being chased just now, I faintly heard that the two leaders of the death row prisoners were the big leader and the second leader. It seems that the two Dao Validation Realm prisoners that were killed by senior brother Xiao Chen earlier might be the strongest people in this prison city. Hearing Suluo's words, Xiao Chen's eyes lit up. In the previous battle, he had indeed killed two death row prisoners at the beginning of the Dao Proving Realm. If what Suluo said was true and those two were the chief and second chief of this prison city, then things would be simple. Everyone could just directly kill their way in and easily destroy the prisoners and demonic beasts in this prison city. Are you sure about this? Xiao Chen looked at Suluo and asked with a serious expression. Senior brother Xiao Chen, I heard it clearly. The prisoners did indeed call for the big leader and the second leader. In response to Xiao Chen's question, Suluo nodded and replied with an extremely serious expression. Suluo was certain that he had not heard wrongly. Hearing this, Xiao Chen made a prompt decision and ordered everyone to immediately attack the prison city. However, they could not go too deep. If it was as Suluo said and there were no experts in this prison city, then they would directly destroy it. However, if the information provided by Suluo was wrong, then everyone could choose to retreat immediately. Naturally, no one objected to Xiao Chen's decision. As for how the points would be distributed, it was actually very simple. The points would naturally belong to whoever killed the prisoners. Please collect, vote, recommend. Chapter 547. With the decision made, everyone immediately launched an attack on the prison city. Under the lead of Xiao Chen and Suluo, more than 40 disciples of the Celestial Equal Sect and the Fire God Sect rushed towards the prison city. There was no protection at all. Just a simple wooden fence was naturally unable to stop the attack of the disciples of the two sections. However, as the disciples of the two sects launched their attack, many of the prisoners in the prison city quickly gathered together. In just over 10 breaths, there were already 70 to 80 prisoners gathered in the open space outside the prison city. Each of them had a ferocious look on their faces. The murderous aura on their bodies gathered together, causing one to involuntarily feel a chill down one's spine. These damned disciples of the sects actually dared to attack the prison city. They're courting death. A prisoner with a cultivation base at the peak of the Dao Querying Realm shouted coldly when he saw Xiao Chen and the others charging towards him. They're trying to eat us in one bite, aren't they? They really don't know what's good for them. Brothers, let's kill these disciples of the sects today and stew them in a pot. It's been a long time since I've eaten human flesh. Moreover, these are the genius disciples of the sections. I think their flesh must be very delicious. Facing the charge of Xiao Chen and the others, these prisoners showed no signs of fear at all. Some even suggested that they should eat the flesh of Xiao Chen and the others. Never underestimate the prisoners of the dark prison secret realm, and even more so, don't pity them. These guys were a bunch of perverts. Eating people was a common occurrence for them. In fact, in the dark prison secret realm, it was not uncommon for prisoners to eat other prisoners. There were once disciples of the sects who pitied these prisoners. During the battle, they took pity on them and did not kill them in the end. However, in the end, these pitiful disciples were killed by these prisoners instead. Even their corpses were eaten by them. Therefore, when facing these prisoners, one must not show the slightest bit of mercy, let alone be soft-hearted. Unsheathing the ink dragon sword, Xiao Chen stood at the front of the group. He directly slashed out with his sword. A terrifying sword edge flashed past, instantly slicing several prisoners in half. So powerful. Suluo was shocked to see Xiao Chen beheading several prisoners with a single slash. Isn't he too strong? As the sword fell, both sides clashed head-on at the same time. A fierce battle broke out in an instant. Xiao Chen raised his sword and slashed down, ending the life of another prisoner. He then shouted in a deep voice, "Kill!" Under the leadership of Xiao Chen, the morale of the disciples of the two sects soared. On the other hand, the death row prisoners did not change their expressions at all. Although they could see that Xiaochen was extremely powerful, would they be afraid? Obviously, it wouldn't. To these prisoners, they no longer cared about life and death. No matter what, their fates were already set in stone. Even if they could escape death this time, they would never be able to get out of the darkness prison's secret realm. A fierce battle broke out, and Xiaochen kept a close eye on the situation during the battle. Soon, he found the most powerful person among the prisoners on death row. It was a middle-aged burly man with a ferocious appearance. The murderous aura on his body was extremely dense, and he had a cultivation base of the Dao validation realm. Among the 70 to 80 prisoners, only this burly man had a cultivation base of the Dao validation realm. The others were either in the Dao querying realm or the sky realm. Is this guy the strongest? Xiaochen said softly as his gaze locked onto the burly man. As Xiaochen spoke, the burly man attacked a disciple of the celestial equal sect. Facing a burly man with a cultivation base of the Dao validation realm, the celestial equal sect disciple was naturally no match for him. In just one move, he was forced to retreat a few steps. "Ha, you're all talk and no substance. You can't even take a single punch from me. If that's the case, go to hell." The burly man sneered after repelling the celestial equal sect disciple with a single punch. He then stepped forward again, ready to kill the celestial equal sect disciple. Don't expect these prisoners to show mercy. It was impossible. Seeing the burly man rushing towards him, the celestial equal sect disciple's face turned pale. Although he wanted to resist with all his might, there was nothing he could do in the face of a huge gap in strength. Just when the celestial equal sect disciple thought he was going to die, a sword light suddenly flashed and forced the burly man to retreat. Then, Xiaochen appeared in front of the celestial equal sect disciple. "Senior brother Xiaochen." Xiaochen's appearance made the disciple overjoyed. Hearing that, Xiaochen said indifferently, "Go kill the others. I'll deal with this person." "Yes, senior brother Xiaochen." Xiaochen naturally couldn't let the others deal with the burly man in front of him. Other than himself, the others were no match for this burly man. After forcing the celestial equal sect disciple to retreat, the burly man looked at Xiaochen and said with a sneer, "You're the strongest among them, aren't you? Haha, interesting. However, you disciples of the sects are all superficial. You have cultivation but don't know how to fight." "Oh, is that so? Then let's try." The burly man's meaning was obvious. Xiaochen and the other disciples of the sects were young but their cultivation wasn't weak. However, in terms of combat experience, they obviously couldn't compare to the prisoners who had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. He was treating Xiaochen as a flower in a greenhouse. However, was that really the case? Along the way, the battles that Xiaochen had experienced were probably no less than those death row prisoners. Xiaochen didn't want to engage in a meaningless argument with the burly man. As soon as he finished speaking, he took the initiative to attack. Sword intent gushed out and he slashed out with his sword. Sensing the soaring sword intent on Xiaochen, the burly man was obviously stunned. "You've comprehended sword intent in such a short time and have already reached the limit of minor accomplishment. Not simple, not simple. However, do you think you can kill me with this? You're simply too naive. Let me capture you. I think the taste of flesh and blood of a genius like you must be very delicious." He was a little surprised by Xiaochen's powerful sword intent, but that was it. Facing this sword, the burly man had no intention of dodging. He suddenly blasted out a punch and forcibly shattered Xiaochen's sword. The burly man didn't fall into a disadvantageous position in a head-on confrontation. Seeing this, Xiaochen smiled slightly and said, "Not bad. You can take my casual sword. Unfortunately, that's all." With that, Xiaochen leaned forward and the two immediately engaged in a fierce battle. While Xiaochen and the disciples of the two sects were fighting fiercely with the prisoners, not far away, a group of about 30 people was watching all this with cold eyes. Judging from the clothes these people were wearing, they were the disciples of the Iron Sword sect. The leader of the group was watching the battle in front of him with an arrogant look. At this time, a disciple of the Iron Sword sect next to him whispered, "Senior Brother Zhou, shall we take action? Please collect, please vote, please recommend." Chapter 548. Naturally, Xiao Chen and the others did not realize that there was a pair of Iron Sword sect disciples watching them coldly from afar. At this moment, the leader of the Iron Sword sect disciples revealed a sinister smile when he heard the words of the person next to him. "Why should we attack? Isn't it better to let them fight amongst themselves first before we clean up the mess?" Senior Brother Zhou is right. The Iron Sword sect disciple chuckled coldly upon hearing the words of his senior brother Zhou. The disciples of the Celestial Equal sect and the Fire God Gate joined forces to attack the prison city. Such an intense battle naturally attracted people from other sections. After all, with so many people fighting together, it was impossible to hide the aftermath of the battle. Following the appearance of the Iron Sword sect, more disciples from other sects arrived one after another. However, the moment they caught sight of the Iron Sword sect, their faces changed. This was especially so when they caught sight of the leader, Senior Brother Zhou. Everyone instinctively retreated a distance away from him. "Zhou Hua! Damn it! Why is Zhou Hua here? Seems like there's no share for us in this prison city." The leader of a sect looked at Zhou Hua with an ugly expression. The leader of the Iron Sword sect was Zhou Hua, one of the top 3 disciples of the Iron Sword sect. Since the Iron Sword sect was known as one of the top 3 sects, second only to Tianfeng Zone, its foundation was naturally incomparable to any other sect. For the sake of the Glory sect selection this time around, the Iron Sword sect spared no expense in engraving the tripartite Dao formation, allowing 3 of their top geniuses to break through to the Dao validation realm. These 3 were the top 3 disciples of the Iron Sword sect, and Zhou Hua was one of them. Without a doubt, Zhou Hua's strength was at the peak of the Iron Sword sect's disciples. Moreover, with the Iron Sword sect's foundation, even if Zhou Hua encountered other Dao Vindication realm geniuses from other sects, he would still be able to defeat them. This was the terrifying aspect of the 3 great sections. It was also the reason why the other sects constantly reminded their disciples to retreat if they encountered anyone from the 3 great sects in the Abyss Prison's secret realm. One after another, disciples of 7 or 8 sects had gathered around the battlefield. However, these sects had obviously given up on this prison city because Zhou Hua was present. They were very clear that with Zhou Hua leading the Iron Sword sect, it was impossible for them to obtain the points of this prison city. More and more disciples from various sects gathered around. At this time, Xiao Chen also felt this. After killing the burly man, Mu Feng came to Xiao Chen's side and said with a worried expression, "Brother Xiao Chen, there are already many disciples from various sects gathered here. What do they want to do? You still don't understand?" "Of course, they want to reap the benefits." Hearing Mu Feng's words, Xiao Chen said with a smile. The disciples of the 7 or 8 sects looked at Zhan Dou's eruption from afar, but did not have the slightest intention to intervene. How could Xiao Chen not know what they were thinking? It was nothing more than waiting for the winner to be determined so that they could snatch the points from everyone's hands. A cold light flashed in his eyes. These guys wanted to snatch the points from his hands. This was somewhat interesting, but he did not know who would be the one to snatch the points from in the end. Xiao Chen did not restrain himself because of these disciples' covetous gazes. He still ordered everyone to end the battle in the shortest time possible. Since the strongest Dao Vindication realm prisoner had been killed by Xiao Chen, the following matters were naturally much simpler. Under the leadership of Xiao Chen and Su Luo, the prisoners in the prison city were quickly killed by the disciples. After successfully destroying this prison city, everyone naturally reaped a bountiful harvest. However, because of this fierce battle, many of the disciples were injured. Among them, there were a few who were seriously injured. It was obvious that they no longer had the strength to continue fighting. They had finally succeeded, but no one was too happy because they also discovered the current situation. Su Luo came to Xiao Chen's side and said with a solemn expression, "Brother Xiao Chen, we are surrounded by the disciples of other sections. What should we do now? What can we do? We'll just have to deal with whatever comes our way. They want to take advantage of us. What a coincidence. I'm also very interested in the points in their hands. Hearing Suluo's words, Xiaochen smiled without the slightest nervousness. Seeing Xiaochen's calm face, although Suluo's heart was still heavy, he did not say anything more. Based on the current situation, he could only pin his hopes on Xiaochen. However, just as Suluo was thinking about this, a clapping sound came from the sky. Then, a group of disciples from the Iron Sword sect flew in the sky and quickly landed in front of everyone. Haha, not bad, not bad. Heavenly Equal Sect and Fire God Sect. Not bad. They actually destroyed the prison city. The leader was naturally Zhou Hua. At this moment, he was clapping with a smile on his face and said with a smile. Hearing Zhou Hua's words, Suluo's face immediately changed. His mood that had just relaxed completely sank at this moment. The people from the Iron Sword sect had also come. Moreover, it was Zhou Hua who led the team. It's over. This was the only thought in Suluo's heart. He looked at Suluo. Sure enough, after his words fell and after a short pause, Zhou Hua's gaze directly locked onto Xiaochen. Zhou Hua had a panoramic view of the battle just now. He knew that Xiaochen's cultivation was at the Dao validation realm and was the strongest among the group. Looking at Xiaochen, Zhou Hua said with a smile. Okay, now please hand over your points. I don't want to fight. Of course, the premise is that everyone needs to cooperate. Hearing Zhou Hua's words, before Xiaochen could speak, Suluo had already sent a voice transmission to Xiaochen. Senior brother Xiaochen, this person is Zhou Hua, one of the 3 great disciples of the Iron Sword sect. His strength is extremely terrifying. It is said that he is not inferior to the core disciples of the Windless Sacred Sect. Xiaochen was also at the Dao validation realm, the same as Zhou Hua. However, Suluo didn't think that Xiaochen was a match for Zhou Hua. Therefore, he sent a voice transmission to Xiaochen. The meaning was very obvious. It was to take a step back and not provoke Zhou Hua and the Iron Sword sect. Just give them the points. Suluo wanted to settle the matter peacefully. However, was this possible? The things had already entered his pocket. With Xiaochen's character, how could he obediently hand them over? Let alone Zhou Hua, even if the 3 great disciples of the Iron Sword sect gathered at this time, Xiaochen wouldn't hand over his points. Therefore, Xiaochen directly chose to ignore Suluo's voice transmission. He stepped forward and stood in front of Zhou Hua. The two of them were 5 meters apart. Their eyes met. Looking at Zhou Hua, Xiaochen smiled. Senior brother Zhou Hua, is it? Yes, Zhou Hua said. Nice to meet you. Senior brother Zhou Hua, it seems that you want our points? A wise man submits to circumstances. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Zhou Hua thought that Xiaochen was ready to take the initiative to hand over his points. The smile on his face became even brighter. However, just as Zhou Hua's smile bloomed, Xiaochen's next sentence surprised everyone. Xiaochen also revealed a harmless smile and said, Unfortunately, I also want the points in senior brother Zhou Hua's hands. Why don't senior brother Zhou Hua reluctantly part with them and give them to me? Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendation. Chapter 549. As soon as Xiaochen said that, everyone present was stunned. What did he mean? Was he planning to rob Zhou Hua and the disciples of the Iron Sword sect? The meaning of Xiaochen's words was very obvious. Since Zhou Hua wanted to snatch his points, Xiaochen would give him a taste of his own medicine. Since Zhou Hua wanted to rob him, he would naturally rob him back. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Zhou Hua was stunned at first, but he soon burst out laughing. It was as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. Ha, what did you say? You want to rob me of my points? Ha, good, good. I haven't met someone like you in a long time. Very good. Zhou Hua laughed out loud. However, his laughter was filled with dense killing intent. Anyone could tell that Zhou Hua was enraged at this moment. As one of the 3 great disciples of the Iron Sword sect, Zhou Hua didn't even put the core disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong in his eyes. Only the personal disciples of Tianfeng Xingzong could make Zhou Hua fear them. Now, a mere disciple of the Tianqi sect dared to say such words. How could Zhou Hua not be angry? Hearing Zhou Hua's words, the faces of the disciples of the other sects changed slightly. This kid is really not afraid of death. He actually dares to say such words to Zhou Hua. He's simply courting death. Let's see how he'll die now. Almost everyone thought that Xiaochen was crazy. Who was Zhou Hua? To be able to become one of the 3 great disciples of the Iron Sword sect, Zhou Hua's strength was definitely not just for show. It wasn't an exaggeration at all. Although almost every sect now had a genius disciple of the Dao Vindication realm, if these people met Zhou Hua in the same realm, they would definitely lose. There was no other reason but because Zhou Hua's combat strength was stronger and the foundation of the Iron Sword sect was deeper. In the face of Zhou Hua's laughter, Xiaochen ignored him. Meanwhile, Suluo's complexion had already turned deathly pale. It's over, it's completely over now. Originally, it was only a matter of points being stolen, but now, whether or not they could keep their lives was another matter altogether. Suluo's face was deathly pale. At the same time, Zhou Hua's laughter slowly faded away. He stared intently at Xiaochen in front of him, murderous intent surfacing as he spoke in an icy tone. You're very good. However, I'll let you know in a moment that when you say these words, you need to have the strength to match them. Otherwise, you're just courting death. He didn't put Xiaochen in his eyes at all. Although Xiaochen was also at the entry level of the Dao Confirmation realm, so what? There were many people in the Tianfeng mansion who could make Zhou Hua feel apprehensive, but Xiaochen was definitely not one of them. His tone was arrogant, but Xiaochen's expression was as indifferent as ever. He ignored Zhou Hua and turned his gaze to the deathly pale Suluo. Xiaochen smiled faintly. Junior brother Suluo, if you don't dare, you can hand over your points and leave. You don't have to worry about me. He had long seen the fear in Suluo's heart, so Xiaochen didn't force him to stay. Although this battle would be a bit easier if he had the help of the Fire God School's disciples, Xiaochen obviously wouldn't force him. Moreover, the crux of this battle was actually Zhou Hua. As long as he could defeat Zhou Hua, then everything would be easily solved. Hearing Xiaochen's words, Suluo fell into silence. At the same time, the 5 heavenly Qin continent warriors from the Fire God sect had already arrived behind Xiaochen. Their intentions were obvious. They were willing to face the Iron Sword sect together with Xiaochen. Of course, compared to the panic of the Fire God sect's disciples, although the people from the Tianqi sect were uncertain, Xiaochen was their leader. Now that Xiaochen wasn't backing down, they naturally wouldn't back down. After a moment of silence, Suluo finally looked deeply at Xiaochen. To be honest, Suluo was naturally unwilling to hand over his points. However, what could he do? The other party was from the Iron Sword sect. But now, seeing the confidence on Xiaochen's face, Suluo was a little hesitant. He thought, does this guy really have the confidence to deal with Zhou Hua? He didn't know where Xiaochen's confidence came from, but his intuition told him that Xiaochen might really have the confidence to deal with Zhou Hua. Suluo clenched his teeth and said, Senior brother Xiaochen, I'll leave Zhou Hua to you. Leave the others to us. Suluo's words clearly expressed his choice. In the end, Suluo still chose to believe in Xiaochen and give it his all. As long as Xiaochen could hold Zhou Hua back, there was no need to defeat him. Then, there would be a fight. Hearing Suluo's words, Xiaochen smiled faintly. Zhou Hua snorted coldly and said, another one who doesn't know his place. Since your Fire God sect also wants to die, then I'll fulfill your wish. Tianqi sect, Fire God sect, everyone here today will die. Obviously, Zhou Hua had the intention to kill Xiaochen, Suluo, and the other disciples of the 2 sections. Xiaochen didn't care about it and said with a smile, perhaps the ones who will die in the end will be the people from your Iron Sword sect. Haha, very well. In that case, let me see if your strength is as powerful as your mouth. With a cold smile, Zhou Hua chose to attack first. He took a step forward and threw a punch at Xiao Chen. Following Zhou Hua's attack, the disciples of the Iron Sword sect behind him also took out their weapons and charged towards the disciples of the Tianqi sect and Fire God sect. The battle was about to start. In terms of numbers, the disciples of the Iron Sword sect were clearly fewer. They only had about 30 people. On the other hand, the Tianqi sect and the Fire God sect had a total of about 40 people. Excluding the disciples who were seriously injured, the number of people was still around 40. They had the advantage in terms of numbers. However, this battle didn't depend on the number of people. The one who could decide the outcome of this battle was Xiao Chen and Zhou Hua. The outcome of the battle was directly related to the outcome of this battle. If Xiao Chen was defeated by Zhou Hua in 2 or 3 moves, then even if the Tianqi sect and the Fire God sect had the advantage in numbers, they would still have no chance of winning. This was because no one would be able to restrain Zhou Hua. Everyone knew this. Therefore, after the battle broke out, the surrounding disciples all locked their eyes on the battle between Xiao Chen and Zhou Hua. The battle between the two of them was the most crucial. Under everyone's gaze, Zhou Hua's fist carried a terrifying power as it blasted towards Xiao Chen. In the face of Zhou Hua's punch, Xiao Chen didn't have any intention of dodging. He also threw a punch at Zhou Hua's fist. Seeing that Xiao Chen actually wanted to take his punch head-on, the killing intent in Zhou Hua's eyes intensified. He shouted coldly, "You're courting death." In Zhou Hua's opinion, Xiao Chen was courting death if he wanted to take him head-on. As soon as Zhou Hua's voice fell, the two fists finally collided. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. Chapter 550. It was a head-on collision without any technique. As the fists of the two collided, the ground where the two of them were standing instantly cracked. Cracks continuously extended in all directions. At the same time, the powerful shockwave also sent many of the surrounding disciples flying far away. There were disciples from the Tianqi sect, the Fire God sect, and the Iron Sword sect. Regardless of whether they were enemies or allies, as long as they were within 100 meters of Xiao Chen, they were sent flying mercilessly. Facing Zhou Hua, Xiao Chen did not retreat at all. Instead, he used the most simple and violent head-on collision. As the two fists collided, the corners of Xiao Chen's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Is that all you've got? That's a little too disappointing." Zhou Hua was indeed one of the top people among the younger generation of the Tianfeng mansion. However, after coming into contact with Zhou Hua, Xiao Chen found that Zhou Hua's strength had disappointed him. In terms of physical strength, Zhou Hua was not able to satisfy Xiao Chen. One must know that Xiao Chen had not even used his tempered battle body. Even so, he was already on par with Zhou Hua. Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Hua was stunned. Unlike Xiao Chen, Zhou Hua was a little surprised. There was no other reason. Xiao Chen's strength was beyond his imagination. Just by coming into contact with him, Zhou Hua knew that Xiao Chen's strength and physical strength were not weaker than his own. He had misjudged Xiao Chen, but Zhou Hua obviously would not admit it. Zhou Hua snorted coldly and said, "You have some skills, but what can you change? Die for me." Saying that, Zhou Hua sent a whip kick straight at Xiao Chen's face. Seeing this, Xiao Chen leaned back slightly and cleverly avoided Zhou Hua's attack. A strong wind blew past his eyes, and his attack missed. Zhou Hua took the opportunity to summon his celestial weapon, a silver-white longsword. The Iron Sword sect was a sword sect. Almost all of its disciples were sword cultivators. As one of the 3 disciples of the Iron Sword sect, Zhou Hua was naturally a sword cultivator. Seeing Zhou Hua summon his celestial weapon, Xiao Chen also summoned his black dragon sword. Holding the black dragon sword in his hand, a terrifying sword intent immediately gushed out from Xiao Chen's body. Sword will. Zhou Hua was slightly stunned when he sensed Xiao Chen's sword will, because he could feel that the sword will coming from Xiao Chen was not weaker than his own. It seemed that Xiao Chen's sword will was about to break through to the level of small success. He did not expect Xiao Chen's sword will to be so powerful. However, Zhou Hua was not an ordinary person either. He also raised his sword will to the extreme. Before they even fought, the sword wills of the two had already begun to compete. With the support of the sword intent, the space within a radius of a few hundred meters around them seemed to be completely sealed. It was as if anyone who broke into this space would be mercilessly attacked by their sword intent. Left with no choice, the other disciples who were in the midst of the fierce battle could only withdraw and give the space to Xiao Chen and Zhou Hua. I must say that you have indeed surpassed my expectations. However, it doesn't matter. Only by killing someone like you can one truly feel proud. Today, you will definitely be a ghost under my sword. Holding the heavenly armament treasure sword in his hand, Zhou Hua coldly said. Hearing Zhou Hua's words, Xiao Chen said indifferently. Noisy. Then, he raised his Jianyi slash, an earth-level upper-grade martial skill, 3-layered waves. Child's play. Facing Xiao Chen's attack, Zhou Hua sneered. He didn't dodge, but also slashed out with his sword, also using an earth-level upper-grade martial skill. The two swords collided fiercely, and the space was directly torn apart. Then, the two attacks cancelled each other out. No one hurt the other, but Xiao Chen took advantage of the opportunity just now and came in front of Zhou Hua. Stepping on the running tiger, Xiao Chen stabbed out with his sword and said calmly, "Let me see if your swordsmanship is disappointing. You are courting death." Hearing Xiao Chen's words, Zhou Hua's face darkened in the face of Xiao Chen's attack. He also stabbed out with his sword, and the two immediately engaged in a fierce battle. They didn't hold back at all, and their speed was extremely fast. Xiao Chen had the running tiger, but Zhou Hua had obviously learned a heaven-level upper-grade martial skill, so his speed wasn't inferior to Xiao Chen's. A heaven-level upper-grade martial skill was the celestial equal sex unique skill, and there was only one of it. However, in the Iron Sword sect, although a heaven-level upper-grade martial skill was also the sex unique skill, there was definitely more than one of it. This was the gap between the foundation of the two sides. Of course, the reason why the celestial equal sect was like this was because of Gu Qi himself. They didn't know why Gu Qi wanted to hide his cultivation realm. At the same time, Gu Qi still had many martial skills that he hadn't taken out. Otherwise, how could the celestial equal sect only have one heaven-level upper-grade martial skill? The two of them were locked in a fierce battle. As time passed, the disciples from the other sects began to lose their composure as they watched the two of them fight fiercely. Originally, they thought that Zhou Hua could easily take down Xiao Chen. However, judging from the current situation, Xiao Chen was obviously not simple. His strength wasn't any weaker than Zhou Hua's. This disciple of the celestial equal sect named Xiao Chen is really not simple. He can actually fight with Zhou Hua to this extent. Do you guys think that Zhou Hua went easy on him? Otherwise, why can't he take down Xiao Chen for so long? The battle was very anxious. There were even people who guessed that Zhou Hua went easy on him. However, in the face of this person's guess, he quickly attracted the disdain of his fellow disciples. Idiot, how can he go easy on him in such a battle? Do you think that this is an internal spar of the sect? Moreover, didn't you see Zhou Hua's murderous aura? With such a murderous aura, how can Zhou Hua go easy on him? That's right. In my opinion, Zhou Hua has made up his mind to kill Xiao Chen. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen isn't an ordinary person. Zhou Hua can't do anything to him for the time being. Sigh, who is this Xiao Chen? Why haven't I heard of such a person in the Celestial Equal Sect before? Isn't the strongest person in the Celestial Equal Sect Gu Lingyao? Everyone began to discuss one after another. At the same time, because of the fierce battle between Xiao Chen and Zhou Hua, the older generation experts of the various sects in the main hall of Tianfengsheng Zone had also turned their attention to this place. Their eyes were fixed on the light screen, watching the two people fighting fiercely on it. The older generation experts of the various sects had different expressions and thoughts. For example, the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect had an ugly expression. A quarter of an hour had passed, but Zhou Hua still couldn't take down Xiaochen. This made the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect feel ashamed. After all, the Celestial Equal sect and the Iron Sword sect weren't on the same level. However, in the face of Xiaochen, Zhou Hua, as one of the three great disciples of the Iron Sword sect, couldn't take down Xiaochen for a long time. With a gloomy expression, the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect looked at Tian Guochuan and the others with an unkind smile on his face. "Brother Tian, your Celestial Equal sect has produced a good seedling. Congratulations. Please collect, recommend, and vote." Chapter 551. Although he was congratulating, anyone could see that the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect was full of resentment. Tian Guochuan didn't panic at all when he heard the words of the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect. He also put on an act and replied with a smile, "Ha, you flatter me. My Tianqi sect disciple is still far from that." Tian Guochuan didn't show too much fear even in the face of a half-saint expert. The reason was very simple. It was now the selection period of the sage sects. At the same time, everyone was in Tian Fengxing zone. Tian Guochuan didn't believe that the people of the Iron Sword sect would dare to act presumptuously in Tian Fengxing zone. Seeing that Tian Guochuan wasn't moved at all, the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect's face became gloomier. Finally, he sneered and said, "Haha, interesting. But I hope your Tianqi sect disciple can hold on." Because of Xiaochen's performance, the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect felt that he had lost face. At the same time, while the older generation experts of the various sects were watching the battle through the light screen, the battle between Xiaochen and Zhou Hua was becoming more and more intense. Zhou Hua originally thought that he could easily defeat Xiaochen. But after fighting for so long, Zhou Hua discovered that Xiaochen's strength had far exceeded his expectations. It could be said that he had already used all his means, but he still couldn't do anything to Xiaochen. This made Zhou Hua very anxious. Do I really have to use that move? Zhou Hua thought to himself, but he was a little conflicted. Zhou Hua indeed still had a trump card that he hadn't used. However, he had kept it for those guys from the three major sections. But now, was he going to use it against a mere disciple of the Tianqi sect? He was unwilling, but he had no other choice if he didn't use his trump card. After fighting for so long, Zhou Hua also knew that he couldn't do anything to Xiaochen if he didn't use his trump card. After hesitating for a while, Zhou Hua finally decided to use his trump card. Killing intent flashed in his eyes as he sent Xiaochen's sword flying. Zhou Hua took a step back and successfully pulled away from Xiaochen. "Xiaochen, I will definitely kill you today," Zhou Hua said coldly as he looked at Xiaochen with intense killing intent. Since he had decided to use his trump card, he had to kill Xiaochen. Only then would he be able to vent the hatred in his heart. Xiaochen smirked and ignored Zhou Hua as he sensed that the murderous aura around Zhou Hua had intensified. At the same time, he guessed that Zhou Hua was about to use his strongest move. Xiaochen was also very curious about Zhou Hua's trump card. As one of the three great disciples of the Iron Sword sect, how powerful was Zhou Hua's trump card? Seeing that Xiaochen's expression didn't change at all because of his killing intent, Zhou Hua became even angrier. He didn't say anything else and the spiritual energy in his body soared into the sky. The sword in his hand was also surrounded by layers of flames, as if a fire dragon was coiling around the sword. "Xiaochen, you should be proud to be able to die under the fire dragon sword." "Die, fire dragon sword!" Zhou Hua shouted coldly as he slashed out with his sword. Immediately, a fire dragon swiftly attacked Xiaochen. This sword was Zhou Hua's killing move. At the same time, it was also one of the few heaven-grade superior martial skills in the Iron Sword sect. Originally, Zhou Hua had reserved this move for the people from the three great sections. However, he had made an exception and used it on Xiaochen. Seeing the fire dragon rushing towards Xiaochen, Zhou Hua's face revealed a cold smile. A heaven-grade superior martial skill. It's over. Xiaochen is completely done for. Seeing Zhou Hua's attack, the disciples from the various great sects whispered softly. Although they didn't directly face Zhou Hua's fire dragon sword, everyone still felt an irresistible might that constantly emanated from the fire dragon. Just based on the aura alone, they could determine that they wouldn't be able to block the sword. As expected of one of the three great disciples of the Iron Sword sect, his strength was indeed terrifying. Everyone thought that Xiaochen was done for. It was impossible for him to block this sword. However, in the face of everyone's speculation, Xiaochen sneered and said, "Is this your trump card? It's just SOSO." In the face of the terrifying fire dragon sword, Xiaochen's answer was just SOSO. Hearing this, the killing intent in Zhou Hua's eyes intensified. He snorted and said, "Humph, you're just trying to win with words. Watch how I kill you with one sword." While speaking, the fire dragon had already arrived in front of Xiaochen. Then, it swallowed him in one gulp. He was directly swallowed by the fire dragon. Then, the raging flames seemed to burn the sky to ashes. It's over. Xiaochen is definitely over. Seeing this scene, everyone thought in their hearts. Including the experts of the older generation in Tianfengsheng Zone, they also thought that Xiaochen was doomed. Seeing this result, the half-saint expert of the Iron Sword sect smiled. Obviously, he was in a good mood. On the other hand, Tian Guochuan and the others all looked worried. Their eyes were fixed on the light screen. However, it was a pity that they couldn't see Xiaochen's figure at this time. Only a sea of fire was reflected in their eyes. After the fire dragon swallowed Xiaochen, it turned into a sea of fire. At this time, Xiaochen should have fallen in this sea of fire. Zhou Hua had absolute confidence in the fire dragon sword. He laughed loudly and said, "Ha, Xiaochen, I've already said that it's your fortune to die under the fire dragon sword." Zhou Hua did not think that Xiaochen could still be alive. The fire dragon sword was a heaven-grade superior martial skill. However, just as Zhou Hua could not help but laugh out loud, an indifferent voice came out from the sea of fire before he could even finish laughing. "Isn't it too early for you to be happy? Moreover, your fire dragon sword. TSK. It's not that great. At least, it's still a little lacking if you want to kill me." Along with the emergence of this voice, the smile on Zhou Hua's face instantly froze. Then, the sea of fire actually began to separate into two sides, forcibly creating a vacuum in the middle. The flames seemed to have been forcefully pushed aside by someone. As the sea of fire was parted, a young man in white stood proudly in the sky. His body was shining with intense golden light. This person was none other than Xiaochen, who had been swallowed by the fire dragon earlier. Facing Zhou Hua's fire dragon sword, Xiaochen naturally didn't hide his strength. He immediately displayed the tempered battle body. The tempered battle body was indeed extremely terrifying. Even in the face of a heaven-level upper-grade martial skill like the fire dragon sword, he wasn't afraid at all. The flames couldn't even enter Xiaochen's body. Under the protection of the tempered battle body, Xiaochen's clothes weren't affected by the flames. Impossible. How is this possible? Seeing Xiaochen appear, Zhou Hua and the Iron Sword sect's half-saint expert in the heavenly wind sacred ground exclaimed almost at the same time. Facing Zhou Hua's horror, Xiaochen slowly walked out of the sea of fire with a faint smile on his face. "Nothing is impossible. I can only say that you're too weak. Begging for collection, begging for monthly votes, begging for recommendations. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.